The San Simon Valley stretched beneath a merciless Arizona sun, the air shimmering with heat. It was 1879, and the desert seemed determined to reclaim whatever small intrusions man had made upon its domain. Ethan Harlow knelt in the sand, wrists bound behind his back. Sweat trickled down his temples, catching in his beard before dropping to the parched earth. Before him stood Major James Hollister, the afternoon sun glinting off the barrel of the revolver aimed at Ethan's head. "You always were stubborn, Harlow," Hollister said, his voice calm as if discussing the weather. "Could have been something. Instead, you'll die out here where no one will remember your name." Surrounding them were Apache warriors, their faces painted for battle, weapons ready. At their center stood a woman with eyes like fire, her posture regal, despite the dust and blood on her clothing. Hollister turned to her with a smile that never reached his eyes. "You know what he did to your family, Kiana. End it." He extended the revolver toward her. "It's your right." The woman, Kiana, stepped forward, her movement fluid as water in a land that had forgotten rain. She took the weapon, its weight familiar in her hand. Her gaze met Ethan's, and in that moment, something passed between them that Hollister couldn't comprehend. "3 months ago, I would not have hesitated," she said, her English perfect and clear. "But now I know the truth." Confusion flickered across Hollister's face. "What truth? He was there. He led the men who butchered your people at Red River." Kiana's lips curved into a bitter smile. She shifted her aim, the barrel now pointing at Hollister's chest. "And the truth begins with the day you brought a slave to his cabin." 3 months earlier, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust as Ethan Harlow hauled water from the stubborn well outside his cabin. Each pull of the rope sent pain through his scarred shoulder, a reminder of wounds that had healed on the outside but festered within. The bucket broke the surface, half full and muddy. Another bad day and a long succession of them. His cabin crouched beneath the shadow of the mesa like a wounded animal. The log walls were weathered gray, the roof patched in 3 places. A single window faced east, its glass cloudy but intact. Ethan stood 6 feet tall, though his posture sometimes betrayed the weight he carried. At 40, his face was a map of hardship. Tan leather creased at the eyes and mouth, a diagonal scar cutting across his right cheek. His hair, once dark brown, now showed threads of gray at the temples. But it was his eyes that told the true story, steel gray, constantly scanning the horizon, as if expecting danger that was always coming but never quite arrived. Behind the cabin, where the land sloped toward the valley, stood a small cairn of 7 stones. Each dawn, Ethan would place his hand upon it, lips moving silently. The names came to him unbidden. 2 Apache women, 3 children, a warrior. And Warren, his brother, whose laughter would never again echo across the desert. 7 souls lost at Red River, their blood on his hands. The sound of hoofbeats pulled him from his dark thoughts. Visitors were rare and rarely welcome. He reached for the Winchester leaning against the doorframe, the rifle settling against his shoulder like an old friend as he watched 3 riders approach. Roy Blackburn had once been a border patrolman before finding more profitable employment with Hollister. The other 2, Silas Kemp and Fletcher Doyle, were cut from the same cloth. Men who enjoyed inflicting pain and called it duty. "Harlow," Blackburn called. "Fine day for a visit, ain't it?" Ethan didn't lower his rifle. "State your business and move on." Blackburn dismounted with a theatrical groan. Now that's no way to greet old friends. Dust clung to his bushy beard, and the scar through his right eyebrow pulled his expression into a perpetual sneer. "Especially when we bring gifts." "We ain't friends," Ethan replied evenly. "Never were." "Hollister sends his regards," Blackburn said, ignoring the comment. "He says you owe him. We're here to collect." With a nod to his companions, Blackburn turned to Doyle's horse. The man yanked someone from behind his saddle. A woman fell hard to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. Her hands were bound, her black hair matted with dirt and blood. Despite her condition, she managed to rise to her knees, her back straight with defiance. "Caught her near the border," Blackburn explained, as if discussing a stray horse. "Hollister wants information about Chief Warrior Neol's camp. Says you're the man for the job." "And if I refuse?" Blackburn's hand rested on his pistol. "Then we'll have to report to the territorial authority that you're harboring a savage." A trap, elegantly laid. If Ethan refused, he'd be labeled a traitor. If he agreed, he'd become a torturer. Either way, Hollister would win. You've got 3 days, Blackburn continued. Get what Hollister needs by any means necessary. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. She doesn't have to survive the process. With that, the three men mounted and rode away, leaving the woman kneeling in the dust. Ethan watched them disappear into the heat haze before lowering his rifle. Only then did he approach her, kneeling before her with a knife drawn. I'm going to cut you loose, he said. Don't try anything foolish. Why wait? Kill me now. I will tell you nothing, she responded, her perfect English surprising him. Ethan answered in halting Apache. I am not your enemy. This caught her off guard. Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing again. Then what are you, a man? She laughed bitterly. No, not anymore. I see that in your eyes. As the ropes fell away, she rubbed her raw wrists, studying him with a calculating gaze. Ethan offered his hand, but she ignored it, rising on her own despite her obvious pain. Her eyes never left his as they walked toward the cabin, watching, assessing, ready to exploit any weakness. Night fell quickly in the desert, darkness sweeping across the land like an ink spill. Inside the cabin, Ethan stirred the embers in the fireplace, adding a small log to chase away the evening chill. Behind him, the Apache woman sat on the edge of his narrow bed, watching his every move with the intensity of a hawk. He had cleaned and bandaged her wounds, lash marks on her back that spoke of brutal interrogation, and given her water and food, which she consumed warily. Throughout his ministrations, she had remained silent, offering neither thanks nor further threats. You should rest, Ethan said, not looking at her as he placed the poker back beside the fireplace. So you can slit my throat in my sleep, she replied. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't waste good bandages. He moved to the table, placing his knife and pistol deliberately out of her reach before settling into the chair. I'll sleep here. As the night deepened, Ethan remained awake, listening to the coyotes calling in the distance. Sleep, when it came for him, was always haunted by the same nightmare. Tonight would be no different. The dream began as it always did. Gunfire and smoke, the screams of women and children. The Apache village at Red River burning beneath a merciless sun. Warren running toward a child trapped in a collapsing hut. Hollister's voice cold and commanding. Burn it all. Leave no witnesses. The look in his brother's eyes as the flames consumed him. Not accusation, but disappointment. Then darkness, blessed and brief. Ethan woke with a gasp, hand reaching for his knife, before remembering he had placed it out of reach. Dawn light filtered through the dirty window, painting the cabin in soft gold. The Apache woman was already awake, sitting on the bed, watching him. You call for someone in your sleep, she said. Warren. Who is he? Ethan stood abruptly, moving to the water barrel to splash his face. No one. Not anymore. The dead are never no one, she replied. They walk with us, even in the land of the living. Her insight struck too close. Ethan changed the subject. You know my language well. Where did you learn? Mission school. 10 years among your people. Learning your books, your good. Her lip curled slightly. Your ways of taking everything. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. A single rider this time. Ethan reached for his rifle, motioning for her to move away from the window. Martha Sullivan reined her mare to a stop before the cabin, her weathered face breaking into a cautious smile. At 55, she carried herself with the straight-back dignity of a woman who had faced the wilderness and refused to bend. Ethan, she greeted him, dismounting with practiced ease. Thought you might need some supplies. She nodded toward the saddlebags. Flour, coffee, and some of those biscuits you pretend not to like. You shouldn't have come, he said, taking the saddlebags. It's not safe. Martha's smile faded. That's what I came to tell you. There's trouble brewing in Cottonwood. What kind of trouble? They've formed a new group, Martha said, lowering her voice despite the empty landscape. Call themselves the Frontier Justice League. Wakefield's behind it, but they're all Hollister's men at heart. Reverend Daniel Wakefield was Cottonwood's preacher, a man who spoke more of divine punishment than mercy. Ethan had attended exactly one service after arriving in the territory and had never returned. Armed patrols, Martha continued, claiming they're protecting the settlement from Apache raids, but she trailed off, her eyes drifting to the cabin where the woman's silhouette was visible through the window. Ethan, what have you gotten yourself into? Hollister sent her, says she has information about Niall's camp. And you're supposed to get this information? Martha's expression was skeptical. You who can barely bring yourself to slaughter a chicken. There's more, Martha added, her voice dropping further. Hollister's been promoted, full major now. He's planning something big, gathering men and supplies. Any idea what? No, but they still talk about you in town, Ethan. Not kindly. Martha's eyes were concerned. They haven't forgotten Red River. The name hung between them like a shadow. Ethan's jaw tightened. Neither have I. As Martha prepared to leave, she lowered her voice even further. There's a rumor, a gold mine on Apache land, near Red River. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. That would explain a lot. Watch yourself, Ethan, and Martha hesitated. If you need help, hang a red cloth from your chimney. My boy David is back from Santa Fe. When Martha had disappeared over the ridge, Ethan turned to find the Apache woman standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Who was she? She asked. A neighbor, a friend, maybe. She knows about me. Will she tell others? No, Ethan said with confidence. Martha keeps her own counsel. You trust her, she observed. Why? Because she has secrets of her own to keep. The woman sat across from him, studying him intently. After a moment, she said, My name is Kiana. Ethan Harlow, he replied, though he suspected she already knew. As night descended on the second day, Ethan sat outside the cabin, whittling a piece of juniper wood with absent strokes. The carving was taking the shape of a bird, an eagle perhaps, or a hawk. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Kiana stepped out, her silhouette limned by the faint glow of the oil lamp inside. The stars are different here, she said, looking up at the vast canopy of night. Or perhaps it is that I see them differently now. Ethan followed her gaze. The desert sky blazed with stars, a glittering tapestry stretching from horizon to horizon. They're the same stars, he replied. We're the ones who change. Kiana sat on the bench beside him, maintaining a careful distance. In my tradition, the stars are the spirits of ancestors, watching over us, each one a life that came before, each one a story. My father taught me their English names, Ethan said. Polaris, Sirius, Betelgeuse. He pointed to a bright star low on the horizon. That one is Antares, heart of the scorpion. They sat in silence for a time, the only sounds the whisper of the knife against wood and the distant call of a coyote. It was strange, Ethan thought, how quickly one could adapt to the presence of another after so much solitude. Why did you join the army? Kiana asked suddenly. To kill people like me? I believed I was serving a greater purpose, he said finally. Civilization, progress, manifest destiny, all the grand words they used to justify taking what wasn't ours. And now? Now I know better. Too late. Kiana studied him, her face half hidden in shadow. Your brother, the one you call for in your sleep, he died at Red River. Ethan nodded, the memory sharp as a blade. He tried to save a child from a burning hut. The roof collapsed. An Apache child? Yes. Then perhaps his spirit walks with the stars of my people, not yours. It was a kind thought, offered without expectation. Ethan found himself strangely moved by it. Tell me about your father, he said, changing the subject. Niall, he's a war chief? He is more than that, a leader, a keeper of traditions. He was a translator for your army once, long ago, until he saw the truth of their promises. Pride colored her words. He is not the savage your newspapers describe. He is simply a man protecting what little remains. That night, as Kiana slept on the narrow bed and Ethan dozed in his chair, the nightmare came again. Red River, flames, Warren's voice calling his name. But this time, something was different. In the dream, Ethan saw Hollister more clearly, speaking to someone just out of sight, their voices low but urgent. Something about a map, about gold, about clearing the vermin. Then Warren was there, overhearing, his face shocked, and Hollister turning, seeing him, drawing his pistol. Ethan woke with a case of cold sweat soaking his shirt despite the warm night. Across the room, Kiana's eyes gleamed in the darkness, watching. You saw something new, she said softly. Just a dream, Ethan replied, his voice rough. As dawn approached, Kiana stood by the window, looking out at the pre-dawn darkness. "They will come with the sun," she said. "Your 3 days are up." Ethan joined her at the window. "You still haven't told me why Hollister really wants you." "Because I know things he doesn't want others to know." "About the gold mine?" She turned to him, surprised. "How did you—" "Martha mentioned rumors, and I just remembered something from before." Kiana studied him for a long moment, coming to some internal decision. "Not just the mine. Maps of water sources, sacred sites, paths through the mountains known only to my people. Information that would make it easy to drive us out or hunt us down. And you have this information?" "Some of it." She met his gaze steadily. "Enough to be dangerous." The first ray of sunlight crested the mesa, illuminating Kiana's face. It revealed a small scar near her temple that Ethan hadn't noticed before. Old and precise, not the result of battle or accident. "You're not just any prisoner," Ethan said slowly, the pieces falling into place. "Hollister didn't capture you randomly." A smile touched Kiana's lips, though it held no warmth. "Very good, Mr. Harlow. You begin to see." "You let yourself be captured," he continued, the realization dawning. "You wanted to be brought here." "Not here specifically," she corrected. "But yes, I allowed those fools to catch me." "Why?" Kiana reached into her dress, drawing out a folded piece of paper that had somehow escaped detection. On it was a crude drawing of a cabin, his cabin, with marks indicating the surrounding terrain. "Because I needed to find you," she said simply. "The only survivor of Red River, the man who knows what really happened that day." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Who are you really?" "I told you my name. I am Kiana, daughter of Neil." Her eyes held his, unflinching. "And I was there at Red River when your people murdered my family. I need to know who gave the order." And wait. The sun climbed higher, bathing the cabin in light that seemed suddenly harsh and unforgiving. Outside, dust rose on the horizon, riders approaching. Blackburn and his men, right on schedule. Time had run out. "Hide this," Ethan said, thrusting his brother's journal into Kiana's hands. "Whatever happens next, don't let them find it." She took the worn leather book without question, tucking it into her dress as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Ethan checked his rifle, then positioned himself in the doorway, his expression hardening into the mask he had worn as a scout, emotionless, calculating. "Stay inside," he instructed. "Let me handle this. And if you decide to give me to them after all?" Kiana's voice was steady, but Ethan caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. "I won't," he promised, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "But be ready to run if things go wrong." Blackburn and his men reined in before the cabin, dust settling around them like a shroud. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hard-packed earth. "Morning, Harlow," Blackburn called, his voice jovial but his eyes cold. "Brought your breakfast." He tossed a cloth-wrapped package that landed in the dirt at Ethan's feet. "Compliments of Reverend Wakefield's wife. Best biscuits in the territory, they say." "What do you want, Blackburn?" The man's smile faded. "You know damn well what I want. Information. Where's the Apache woman?" "Inside," Ethan replied. "Resting." Silas Kemp spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Resting? Should be begging for mercy by now." His hand rested on the whip coiled at his belt, fingers caressing the braided leather. "Let me show you how it's done." "That won't be necessary," Ethan said, his voice dangerously calm. "I have what Hollister wants." Blackburn's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Must have been mighty persuasive." He exchanged glances with his companions. "Well then, let's hear it." "Not that simple. The information's complicated. Need to deliver it personally." "To Hollister?" Blackburn laughed. "You think he's got time to chat with a washed-up scout?" "Tell him I know about Red River," Ethan said quietly. "About what he's really looking for. He'll make time." Something in Ethan's tone made Blackburn's smile falter. The man studied him for a long moment, trying to determine if he was bluffing. "Fine," he finally said. "Get the woman. You're both coming with us." "No," Ethan's rifle barrel lifted slightly. "I go alone. She stays here." "That wasn't the deal," Blackburn growled, his hand moving toward his pistol. I'm making a new one. Ethan's finger settled on the trigger. You tell Hollister I'll meet him tomorrow, noon, at Broken Spoke Ridge. Just him and me. The tension stretched between them like an over-tightened wire ready to snap. Blackburn's companions shifted uneasily, hands hovering near their weapons. You're making a mistake, Harlow, Blackburn warned. Hollister doesn't take kindly to changes in plans. Neither do I, Ethan replied evenly. Yet here we are. For a moment it seemed violence was inevitable. Then Blackburn laughed, the sound sharp and unexpected. Always did have brass ones, Harlow. I'll tell the major, but if you don't show... He let the threat hang unfinished. I'll be there, Ethan assured him. Blackburn nodded, then turned his horse. Noon tomorrow, don't be late. He paused, glancing back with a cruel smile. And keep the savage warm. When Hollister's done with you, we'll be back for her. The three men rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Ethan watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Kiana appeared beside him, her expression a mixture of confusion and cautious respect. Why did you do that? Bought us time, Ethan replied, lowering his rifle. But not much. We need to move. To meet Hollister? She asked, skepticism clear in her voice. No, to get as far from here as possible before they realize I lied. Ethan turned to her, his decision made. You wanted answers about Red River. I'll give them to you, but not here, not now. Kiana studied him, weighing his sincerity. Where then? Your father's camp, Ethan held her gaze. If you'll take me there. Surprise flickered across her face. You want me to lead you to our sacred place? After what your people did? I'm not asking for forgiveness, Ethan clarified. Just a chance to set things right. Kiana was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded once. We leave at nightfall. The desert is too dangerous by day. As they prepared for the journey, gathering supplies and planning their route, Ethan found himself watching Kiana with new eyes. Her movements were efficient, her suggestions practical. She wasn't just a war chief's daughter. She was a warrior in her own right, trained and capable. When the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the mesa in shades of amber and gold, they paused in their preparations. The moment stretched between them, a brief interlude of stillness before the chaos that would surely follow. Why did you really save me from those men? Kiana asked quietly, breaking the silence. The truth this time. Ethan considered his answer carefully. Because 7 graves are enough, he finally said. I won't add yours to the tally. Even though I am your enemy, are you? Ethan turned to look at her. Or are we both just pawns in Hollister's game? Kiana's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Perhaps you are right, Ethan Harlow. Perhaps the true enemy is not standing before us, but waiting beyond the horizon. As the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the desert sky, Ethan felt a strange calm settle over him. For 2 years he had been hiding from Hollister, from his past, from himself. Running away had solved nothing. Perhaps it was time to stop running and face what came. Darkness embraced the desert like a lover, wrapping the land in shadows deep enough to swallow a man whole. Ethan secured the last of their supplies to his horse, checking the cinch with practiced hands. Kiana emerged from the cabin, her silhouette transformed. She had discarded her torn dress for a pair of Ethan's trousers, belted tightly at the waist, and a faded blue shirt that hung loose on her smaller frame. A red bandana covered her distinctive hair. In the dim starlight, she could pass for a young vaquero from a distance, exactly as intended. You left the journal? Ethan asked, nodding toward the cabin. Hidden beneath the floorboard, as you said. Kiana mounted the second horse, an older mare that Ethan kept for pack horse duty. If Blackburn returns, he will find nothing of value. Ethan had written a brief note for Martha, left in the empty coffee tin where she would surely look first. It explained little but warned her to stay away from the cabin for a while. He hoped it would be enough to keep her safe. We'll follow the arroyo east, Kiana said, keeping her voice low. Then north through Shadow Canyon when we reach the foothills. They rode in silence, the horses' hooves muffled by the sandy soil of the dry riverbed. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate without lamps, which would have been visible for miles in the clear desert air. After an hour of steady riding, they paused at a bend in the arroyo. Kiana dismounted gracefully, pressing her ear to the ground. "Riders," she whispered, rising. "Two, maybe three. Coming fast along the main trail." "Blackburn?" "Possible. They're heading toward your cabin." She remounted quickly. "We should hurry." They pushed on, leaving the arroyo when it began to curve away from their intended path. The foothills loomed ahead, darker shapes against the night sky. Kiana led them up a narrow game trail that wound between massive boulders and gnarled junipers clinging stubbornly to the rocky soil. As they climbed higher, Ethan felt his horse tense beneath him, ears pricked forward. "Something's wrong," he murmured, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. Kiana nodded, scanning the shadows. "We're being watched." The words had barely left her lips when a figure materialized from behind a boulder. Arrow knocked and drawn, then another and a third. Apache warriors, their faces painted for war, their weapons aimed at Ethan's heart. "Ashtin Dola," Kiana called out, raising her empty hands. She continued in Apache, her voice calm but authoritative. The lead warrior, tall and muscular, with a long scar down his cheek, responded sharply, never lowering his bow. His dark eyes fixed on Ethan with undisguised hatred. "What's he saying?" Ethan asked quietly, keeping his hands visible. "That's Talon, my cousin," Kiana replied. "He wants to kill you where you sit." Persuasive fellow. Despite the danger, Kiana's lips quirked slightly. "I told him you have information about Red River, that we need you alive." "And?" "He disagrees." Finally, Talon lowered his bow slightly, spitting out what was clearly a reluctant concession. The other warriors followed suit, though their expressions remained hostile. "He will allow you to continue, Quinn," Kiana translated, "but you must be bound and blindfolded when we near our sacred place." Ethan hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Fair enough." As they resumed their journey, now with an escort, Ethan leaned slightly toward Kiana. "You didn't tell me we'd have company," he murmured. "They've been following us since we left your cabin," she replied. "Did you really think my father would send me alone into enemy territory without protection?" "You seemed pretty alone when Blackburn dropped you at my doorstep." "A necessary risk. We needed to confirm what you knew about Red River." "You used me," Ethan realized, the pieces falling into place. "This was a test." "Yes," she admitted without apology, "and without me, they would have killed you long before now." The revelation should have angered him, but Ethan found himself respecting her strategy. It was the kind of calculated risk he himself might have taken in her position. They traveled through the night, winding ever deeper into the mountains. When the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Talon called a halt at a shallow cave set into a cliff face. Inside, a small fire had already been prepared, shielded from outside view by the curve of the stone. "We rest here," Kiana explained. "Travel by day is too risky." Ethan dismounted stiffly, his old shoulder wound aching from the long ride. The warriors took the horses, leading them to a hidden corral farther up the canyon. Talon remained, watching Ethan with unconcealed suspicion. The cave was cool and dry, large enough for them to sit comfortably but not stand fully upright. Ethan settled against the wall, accepting the strip of dried meat Kiana offered. Talon spoke rapidly to her, gesturing occasionally toward Ethan. "He wants to know why you're really here," Kiana translated. "He doesn't believe you want to help us." "Tell him I'm not here to help or hurt. I'm here for the truth." When Kiana translated, Talon studied Ethan for a long moment before responding more calmly. "He says actions are all that matter to the Apache, and your actions at Red River speak louder than any words." Ethan met the warrior's gaze directly. "I was there," he acknowledged in halting Apache. "I carry that shame." But this admission in his own language seemed to surprise Talon. He replied with a question that Ethan couldn't fully grasp. "He asked if you know who killed his brother," Kiana translated. "A young warrior, barely 17, who died in the flames." Ethan shook his head. "There was confusion, smoke. I can't say who fired which shot or set which fire." When Kiana translated, Talon's expression hardened again. He spoke a few terse words before moving to the cave entrance to stand guard. "He says you will remember before this is over," Kiana said softly. "One way or another." The threat hung in the air between them, and as daylight filled the canyon beyond the cave mouth, outside the desert was awakening to another day of merciless sun and endless sky. Within the cave, in the cool shadows of stone, Ethan closed his eyes. not to sleep, but to prepare himself for whatever lay ahead in the Apache camp. Judgment, perhaps, or a reckoning long overdue. The journey resumed at dusk, with Ethan blindfolded as promised once they entered what Kiana called sacred land. He felt the terrain changing beneath his horse's hooves, from rocky slopes to softer earth, the air growing cooler and carrying the scent of pine and flowing water. The sounds around him shifted too, bird song, the rustle of leaves, distant voices. "We're here," Kiana said finally. "You can remove the blindfold." Ethan pulled the cloth from his eyes, blinking as his vision adjusted to the fading twilight. What he saw stunned him into silence. They had entered a hidden valley nestled between towering cliffs, protected from the harsh desert on all sides. Unlike the barren landscape they had crossed, this sanctuary teemed with life. A creek wound through its center, flanked by cottonwoods and willows. Small gardens flourished in patches of rich soil, and nestled among the trees stood an Apache village. Not the temporary camp he had expected, but a settled community. Dozens of dwellings, some traditional wickiups, others more permanent structures of adobe and stone, formed a rough circle around a central clearing. Children paused in their play, women looked up from their work, and warriors reached for weapons as the party approached. Ethan felt the weight of their stares, curiosity mingled with hostility and fear. "They weren't expecting you to bring a white man," Ethan observed quietly. "No," Kiana agreed. "This will be difficult." A crowd gathered as they dismounted. Murmurs rippled through the assembled people, and Ethan caught fragments of Apache that needed no translation. Anger, disbelief, demands for explanation. Talon spoke sharply, gesturing toward Ethan with obvious disdain. Several warriors moved closer, hands on weapons. The tension was broken by the arrival of a tall, imposing figure. Chief Warrior Neil moved through the crowd with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to respect. Despite being in his 60s, he carried himself like a much younger man, his lean frame unbowed by age or hardship. His face was deeply lined, each wrinkle a testament to a life lived beneath the desert sun, but his eyes were sharp and penetrating. Kiana stepped forward, embracing her father briefly before speaking in rapid Apache. Neil listened without expression, his gaze never leaving Ethan's face. When she finished, he approached Ethan with measured steps. "I know who you are, Ethan Harlow," he said in perfect English, his voice deep and resonant. "You were at Red River." The crowd grew silent, waiting. Ethan met Neil's gaze directly, refusing to look away from the judgment he saw there. "Yes," he acknowledged, "I was there. And yet my daughter brings you to our sacred place." Neil's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. "She says you have information about the massacre, about who gave the order." "I do." Ethan stood straight, despite the exhaustion of the journey. "But there's more. Hollister is planning something big. I believe your people are in danger." Neil studied him for a long moment, as if searching for deception in Ethan's features. Finally, he turned to address the crowd in Apache. Whatever he said seemed to calm them, though many still regarded Ethan with open hostility. "Come," Neil said, turning back to Ethan. "We will speak in private." They moved toward a larger dwelling at the far end of the village. As they walked, Ethan observed details that contradicted everything he had been told about savage Apache life. Children played with handmade toys, women worked looms with intricate patterns, elders sat in conversation. It was a community, not just warriors preparing for battle, as Hollister and his kind would have everyone believe. Neil's dwelling surprised Ethan even more. Inside, alongside traditional Apache items, stood a small bookshelf containing volumes of Shakespeare, Emerson, and several history texts. A detailed map of the territory was spread on a wooden table, marked with notations in both Apache and English. A kerosene lamp cast a warm glow over the space, illuminating what appeared to be a desk with writing materials. Seeing Ethan's surprise, Neil allowed himself a small smile. "Did you expect animal skins and primitive weapons only, Mr. Harlow?" "No, sir," Ethan replied honestly. "I've learned not to trust what I've been told about your people." A wise position. Neil gestured for Ethan to sit on a woven mat. Kiana and Talon joined them, completing the circle around a small central fire. "Now tell me what brings you to risk your life by coming here." Ethan gathered his thoughts, aware that his next words could determine not only his fate, but potentially that of everyone in the village. 2 years ago at Red River, my unit was ordered to investigate reports of raids on settler wagons. Hollister claimed your warriors had attacked 3 families, killing all but one child. Ethan's voice was steady, though the memories pained him. We were told it was a punitive mission. Find those responsible and bring them to justice. There were no raids, Neil said quietly. Not by my people. I know that now, Ethan acknowledged. But then I believed what I was told. We all did, except, he paused, the wound still raw, except my brother Warren. He questioned the orders from the beginning. Ethan described the events as he remembered them. The pre-dawn approach to the sleeping village. Hollister's sudden command to attack rather than parley. The chaos that followed. Warren breaking ranks to save a child from a burning dwelling, only to be trapped when the roof collapsed. I always believed it was a tragic mistake, Ethan concluded, an operation gone wrong. But recently I've begun to remember details, conversations between Hollister and others, maps I wasn't supposed to see, Warren's suspicions. What details? Neil pressed. Gold, Ethan said simply. There's a vein in the mountains near Red River. Hollister knew about it before the attack. I believe he deliberately orchestrated the massacre to drive your people away from the area and to eliminate any witnesses to his real plan. Neil and Talon exchanged glances. Kiana leaned forward, her face illuminated by the firelight. The mines, she said. That's what the papers in your brother's journal refer to? Ethan nodded. Warren discovered Hollister's connection to mining interests. He was going to report it to the territorial governor. His voice grew strained. The night before he died, he told me he had evidence. I told him to wait, to be careful. If I had supported him, then your brother would still be dead, Neil said with surprising gentleness. Hollister would have found another way. Talon spoke for the first time in English, his accent heavy, but his meaning clear. Why come now, after 2 years? It was a fair question. Ethan met the warrior's suspicious gaze. Because Hollister is moving again. The Frontier Justice League, the increased military presence, the rumors of Apache raids that never happen, it's the same pattern as before. I believe he's preparing to finish what he started at Red River. To claim the gold, Kiana suggested, and to eliminate anyone who might remember the truth about the massacre, Ethan added, including me. Niall rose and moved to the map on his table, studying it with a furrowed brow. This valley has protected us since Red River. Few outsiders know of its existence. But if Hollister has enlisted trackers, there's more, Ethan said, joining him at the table. Reverend Wakefield in Cottonwood. He's gathering men, stirring up hatred against your people. I believe he and Hollister are working together. The man of God and the man of war, Neil murmured. A powerful alliance. We should move deeper into the mountains, Talon urged, where their horses cannot follow. And abandon our crops, our homes, Kiana challenged. We have children, elders. The journey would claim lives. Staying might claim more, Talon countered. Neil raised a hand, silencing them both. We will discuss this with the council at dawn. He turned to Ethan. Until then, you will remain here, under guard. You understand, of course. Of course, Ethan agreed. He had expected nothing less. Kiana will see to your needs, Neil continued. Tomorrow, we will decide what to do with the information you have brought, and with you. As Kiana led him to a small dwelling at the edge of the village, Ethan felt the stares of the Apache people following his every move. He was an intruder in their sanctuary, a reminder of all they had suffered at the hands of men who looked like him. Trust would not come easily, if at all. The hut was simple but comfortable, with a sleeping mat and a small fire pit. 2 warriors took position outside. Guards, not hosts. Will they kill me? Ethan asked quietly as Kiana prepared to leave. She paused at the doorway. My father believes in justice, not revenge, but not all share his wisdom. She glanced toward where Talon stood watching them from across the clearing. Sleep lightly, Ethan Harlow. With that ambiguous comfort, she left him to the longest night of his life. Dawn came with a cacophony of birdsong, so different from the silence of the desert around Ethan's cabin. He had slept fitfully, waking at every sound, aware of his precarious position. Now, as pale light filtered through the dwelling's entrance, he sat up, stretching his stiff muscles. Kiana appeared at the doorway, carrying a wooden bowl of what appeared to be corn porridge and berries. The council gathers soon, she said, handing him the food. You should eat. Ethan accepted the bowl gratefully. What will happen? They will listen to you, then decide. She sat across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes watchful. Tell them exactly what you told my father. The truth is your only protection now. As he ate, Ethan studied her in the morning light. Without the dust of travel or the tension of their initial encounters, he could better appreciate the quiet strength in her features. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, revealed a depth of thought that belied the stereotype of the simple savage peddled in Eastern newspapers. Why did you really bring me here? He asked suddenly. You could have killed me once you had the information you needed. Kiana considered the question, her head tilting slightly. At first it was, as I said, to verify what you knew about Red River. But then, she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I saw something in you, a man carrying a weight that was breaking him. I know that weight. Before Ethan could respond, Talon appeared at the entrance. It is time, he said curtly. They followed him to the central clearing where the council had assembled. 12 elders and warriors, including Niall, seated in a semicircle. The morning sun cast long shadows across the packed earth as Ethan took his place before them, Kiana standing slightly behind him as translator. Niall began by addressing the council in Apache, occasionally gesturing toward Ethan. When he finished, he turned to Ethan and switched to English. Tell them what you told me, he directed. About Hollister, about Red River, about the gold. Hold nothing back. For the next hour, Ethan spoke, detailing everything he remembered about the events leading to the massacre, his subsequent estrangement from the army, and Hollister's recent activities. As he talked, he watched the faces of the council members, noting the flashes of anger, sorrow, and grim understanding that crossed their features. When he finished, a wizened elder asked a question in Apache. Kiana translated. He asked why we should trust you now, when your kind has broken every treaty, every promise. You shouldn't trust me blindly, Ethan answered honestly. Judge me by my actions. I'm here at great risk to myself, because innocent lives are at stake, yours and others. I couldn't prevent Red River, but perhaps I can stop history from repeating itself. Another council member spoke, his tone accusatory. Kiana hesitated before translating. He says you were a soldier who followed orders. Why should we believe you would not do so again if Hollister offered you pardon? Ethan felt a flash of anger at the implication, but suppressed it. The man's suspicion was justified given the history between their peoples. Because I've seen the cost of following orders without question, he replied. My brother died because of it. 7 stones behind my cabin, 7 graves I visit every dawn, remind me of that cost. The questioning continued, some hostile, some more measured. Throughout, Ethan maintained his composure, answering truthfully even when the truth painted him in an unfavorable light. Finally, Niall raised his hand, signaling an end to the interrogation. The council will deliberate, he announced. Until we decide, you will remain under guard. As Ethan was led away, he caught Kiana's eye. She gave him a small nod, whether of encouragement or merely acknowledgement, he couldn't tell. The day stretched endlessly as he waited in the small dwelling, watched over by silent guards. Occasionally, children would dart past the entrance, curious about the white stranger in their midst. Once, an older woman brought him water, her expression neither friendly nor hostile, merely evaluating. By late afternoon, restlessness drove him to ask the guards if he could at least sit outside. After a brief consultation, they agreed, though they maintained their vigilant watch. Seated on a log outside the dwelling, Ethan observed village life continuing around him. Despite the presence of an outsider, or perhaps because of it, the Apache went about their routines with deliberate normalcy. Women worked at cooking fires or tended small garden plots. Men repaired weapons or crafted tools. Children played games that seemed universal across cultures, laughing and squabbling in equal measure. It struck Ethan how similar this community was to any settler town he had seen. People living, working, raising families. The vast gulf that supposedly separated civilized from savage seemed increasingly arbitrary, a convenient fiction to justify taking what wasn't freely given. As the sun began its descent toward the western cliffs, Talon approached, his expression unreadable. Come, he said simply, the council has decided. Heart pounding, Ethan followed him back to the central clearing where the council had reassembled. Kiana stood beside her father, her face giving no hint of the decision. The village had gathered to witness whatever was to come, their collective silence creating a weight of anticipation. Neil rose as Ethan took his place before the council. "We have heard your words, Ethan Harlow, and judged them against what we know of Red River and of the man called Hollister." Ethan stood straight, prepared for whatever sentence they had determined. "Some argued for your death," Neil continued, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Others for your imprisonment. But the old wisdom tells us, when the snake and the hawk fight, the mouse should not choose sides too quickly." Ethan remained silent, sensing there was more to come. "We believe your warning about Hollister's plans. The signs have been there for those with eyes to see. Increased patrols, strange men in the hills, rumors designed to incite fear." Neil's gaze was piercing. "What we do not yet know is whether you are truly an ally or merely a lesser enemy." "What would convince you?" Ethan asked. "Actions, not words," Talon interjected from his position nearby. "As you yourself suggested." Neil nodded. "We need proof of Hollister's intentions, something that could be brought to the territorial authorities. Your brother's journal is a beginning, but more is needed." "And how do you propose to get that proof?" Ethan asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "You will return to the white man's world," Neil said. "You will find the evidence we need, documents, witnesses, anything that proves Hollister's corruption and his responsibility for Red River." Ethan considered the implications. That means going to Cottonwood, possibly even confronting Hollister himself. "Yes," Neil agreed, "a dangerous task." "And if I refuse?" "Then you remain here, under guard, until this matter is resolved one way or another." Neil's expression softened slightly. "I do not think you will refuse, Ethan Harlow. You did not come this far to stop now." Ethan knew he was right. Despite the risk, he couldn't walk away, not when he finally had a chance to set right what had gone so terribly wrong at Red River. "I'll do it," he said, "but I'll need help. Someone who knows the territory, who can move between your world and mine." Neil glanced at his daughter. "Kiana will accompany you." Talon stepped forward, protesting in rapid Apache. Neil responded firmly, and though Talon clearly disagreed, he backed down with obvious reluctance. "My cousin believes it is too dangerous for me," Kiana explained to Ethan. "He volunteers instead." "With respect," Ethan said, looking at Talon, "your hatred for white men is too obvious. You would draw attention we cannot afford." Talon's eyes narrowed, but he did not dispute the assessment. "It is decided," Neil declared. "You and Kiana will leave at first light. Talon and 2 warriors will follow at a distance in case you need assistance, or in case your intentions prove false." As the council disbanded and the villagers returned to their evening routines, Kiana approached Ethan. "You should prepare yourself," she advised. "The journey back will be harder than the journey here. Hollister's men will be searching for us both." "I know," Ethan acknowledged, "but it's our best chance to stop him." She studied him for a moment. "You truly believe this will work?" "I have to," he replied simply. That night, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion, Ethan sat outside his dwelling, watching the stars wheel overhead. The same stars he had shown Kiana from his cabin seemed different here, viewed from this hidden valley where 2 worlds intersected. "You should rest," Kiana's voice came softly from the darkness. She emerged into the pool of moonlight, wrapping a blanket more tightly around her shoulders against the night chill. "So should you," he countered, but moved aside on the log to make room for her. She sat, her gaze following his to the star-filled sky. "When I was a child," she said after a moment, "my father would tell me that the stars were holes in the blanket of night, allowing the Great Spirit's light to shine through." "A beautiful thought," Ethan murmured. "What did your father teach you about them? Their names, their positions, how sailors use them to navigate the oceans?" Ethan smiled faintly at the memory. "My father believed knowledge was sacred, that understanding the world was a way of honoring its creator. He was a wise man." "He tried to be," Ethan agreed. "He and my mother came west as missionaries, hoping to civilize the savages. Instead, they found themselves respecting the people they met. It wasn't a popular position." "What happened to them?" "Fever took them both when I was 14. Warren was 12. The memory was an old ache, familiar but still tender. We were sent east to live with an uncle, but the West called us back. When the war between the states ended, we joined the army together. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the soft chorus of night insects and the distant call of an owl. "May I ask you something?" Ethan finally said. Kiana nodded. "At Red River, you said you were there, but you weren't captured or killed. How did you escape?" She tensed almost imperceptibly, then relaxed with a soft sigh. "I was visiting another village that day, trading for medicines. When I returned," her voice faltered briefly. "When I returned, there was nothing left but ashes and bodies." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "My brother was there," she continued, her voice steady despite the pain it must have cost her. "He was 8 years old. I found what remained of him near the creek. He had tried to hide in the water." Ethan closed his eyes, the image too vivid, too close to his own nightmares. "I thought I wanted revenge," Kiana said. "For years, that's all I lived for, the chance to make those responsible suffer as I had suffered. And now?" She turned to look at him, her face silvered by moonlight. "Now I wonder if revenge would change anything, if more blood would bring back those we've lost." "It wouldn't," Ethan said with the certainty of experience. "Believe me." Kiana studied him, her expression thoughtful. "How do you live with it, the weight of what happened?" "One day at a time," he answered honestly. "Some days better than others." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. They were silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not the wary distance of strangers, but the shared quiet of two people who had glimpsed each other's deepest wounds and found them achingly similar. "We should try to sleep," Kiana finally said, rising. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." As she turned to go, Ethan spoke again. "Kiana?" She paused, looking back. "Thank you for bringing me here." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank me when we succeed, Ethan Harlow, not before." With that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Ethan alone with the stars and the strange sense that something fundamental had shifted between them. A bridge beginning to form across a chasm that had once seemed uncrossable. They left the valley as dawn broke, traveling on fresh horses provided by the tribe. Ethan wore borrowed Apache clothing, covered by a long duster to disguise his appearance from a distance. Kiana had reverted to her disguise as a young Mexican vaquero. They carried minimal supplies, food, water, weapons, and little else. Speed would be their ally on this journey. Talon and two warriors followed at a distance, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to provide aid if needed. Their presence was both reassurance and reminder. Ethan's goodwill was accepted, but not yet fully trusted. "We'll avoid the main trails," Kiana said, as they descended from the hidden valley into more exposed terrain. "Hollister will have men watching the usual routes." Ethan nodded. "We should reach Cottonwood by nightfall tomorrow if we push hard. Martha's ranch is on the way. We can rest there if it's safe." They rode in silence for the most part, each lost in their own thoughts about the dangerous mission ahead. The landscape gradually transformed from the pine-covered mountains back to the harsher desert terrain. By midday, the sun beat down relentlessly, and they sought shelter in the shadow of a rocky outcropping to rest the horses. "What exactly are we looking for in Cottonwood?" Kiana asked as they shared a small meal of dried meat and hardtack. "Anything that connects Hollister to the mining interests," Ethan replied. "Financial records, correspondence, witnesses willing to talk. Wakefield might have documentation too. Preachers often serve as witnesses for business transactions. And where do we find such things?" "Hollister keeps an office at the fort, but it would be heavily guarded. Wakefield's church would be easier. He lives in a small house behind it." Kiana considered this information. "And if we find nothing?" "Then we try Martha. She hears things, knows people." Ethan took a drink from his canteen. "There's another option, though it's risky. Hollister's favorite watering hole is a place called the Broken Wheel. He keeps a private room in the back for meetings. If we could somehow get access." "You want to break into a saloon frequented by the man hunting us?" Kiana's tone was incredulous. "I said it was risky," Ethan acknowledged with a wry smile. They continued their journey through the afternoon, taking a circuitous route that added miles but kept them away from likely patrol areas. As the sun began its descent, Kiana suddenly raised her hand, signaling a halt. "Riders," she said, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. Coming this way. Ethan scanned the horizon, estimating distances and terrain. There, he said, indicating a dense mesquite thicket near a dry wash. We can hide there until they pass. They urged their horses into the concealing vegetation, dismounting quickly and crouching among the twisted branches. The approaching riders came into view. 4 men moving at a steady trot, their postures suggesting military training. Ethan recognized Blackburn among them, his distinctive beard visible even at this distance. Hollister's men, he whispered. They're searching the trails toward the mountains. Kiana nodded, her body tense as a drawn bow. They watched in tense silence as the riders drew closer, following the main trail that passed within 50 yards of their hiding place. If the horses made a sound, if the men decided to scout the wash, but luck was with them. The patrol continued past, dust rising in their wake as they moved toward the foothills. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Ethan and Kiana exhale. They're casting a wide net, Ethan observed as they remounted. Hollister must be worried about what we know. Or angry that you defied him, Kiana suggested. That too, Ethan agreed. They rode on, more cautious now, using every fold in the terrain for concealment. By nightfall, they had reached the vicinity of Martha's ranch, its buildings just visible in the gathering darkness. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sight after a day of hard riding. Wait here, Ethan instructed, dismounting in a stand of cottonwoods near the creek that fed Martha's modest fields. I'll make sure it's safe. Kiana nodded, taking both horses' reins as Ethan moved toward the ranch house. He approached cautiously, staying in the shadows, alert for any sign of danger. The windows glowed with lamplight, and through one, he could see Martha moving about her kitchen. Alone, it seemed. He knocked softly on the back door, then stepped quickly to the side, hand on his pistol. The door opened a crack, then wider as Martha recognized him. Ethan, she exclaimed in a hushed voice, pulling him inside. Thank God. I thought you might be dead. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of baking bread. Martha looked tired, her normally neat appearance somewhat disheveled, as if she had been under strain. What happened? Ethan asked. Are you all right? I'm fine, but you're in danger, she warned. Blackburn and his men came looking for you the day after you disappeared. When they found your cabin empty, they ransacked it, then burned it to the ground. Ethan had expected as much, but the news still hit hard. The cabin had been his refuge, his penance, his home. They've been watching my place too, Martha continued. Hollister thinks I might know where you went. They were here yesterday asking questions. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to you, Ethan said sincerely. Martha waved away his apology. I've handled worse, but Ethan, there's more. They're saying you helped a prisoner escape, that you've turned traitor. There are wanted posters in Cottonwood offering a reward for both of you, dead or alive. I need to get my companion, Ethan said. We'll move on if it's not safe here. No, stay, Martha insisted. At least for the night. You look exhausted and the patrols usually don't come after dark. She hesitated, then added, Is it true? Do you have an Apache woman with you? Yes, Ethan admitted. Her name is Kiana, daughter of Chief Warrior Neil. Martha's eyes widened. You've been to their camp and lived to tell about it? It's a long story, Ethan said. I'll explain everything, but first I need to bring her in. When Kiana was introduced, Martha showed none of the fear or hostility that might have been expected. Instead, she welcomed her with the same practical kindness and she extended to everyone. You must be hungry, she said, setting plates of stew and bread before them. Eat, then you can tell me what madness you're planning. Over the simple but hearty meal, Ethan explained their mission, the search for evidence against Hollister, the connection to Red River, the imminent threat to the Apache village. Martha listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. You're right about the gold, she confirmed when he had finished. There have been surveyors in the hills, men with equipment testing the streams. They don't advertise their purpose, but it's not hard to guess. Have you heard anything specific about Hollister's plans? Ethan asked. Martha hesitated, glancing at Kiana. There's talk of a final solution to the Apache problem. Wakefield preaches about it every Sunday, clearing the land for God's chosen people. Her distaste was evident. Most folks in town don't know the details, just that something big is coming. When? Kiana asked, her first words since they had sat down. Soon, Martha replied grimly. The Frontier Justice League has been recruiting heavily. Men are arriving from as far as Tucson, bringing weapons, ammunition. We need to get into town, Ethan decided. Find the evidence, then get word to the territorial governor. That won't be easy, Martha warned. Cottonwood's crawling with Hollister's men, and the telegraph office is watched day and night. What about your son, David? Ethan asked. You said he's back from Santa Fe. He's not here right now, Martha said, a shadow crossing her face. He's investigating something for me, but he should return within 2 days. We can't wait that long, Kiana interjected. My people need to prepare, whether we find evidence or not. Martha studied her thoughtfully. You're right, of course. She turned to Ethan. I might have a way to get you into town unnoticed. My late husband's brother Samuel was about your size. He left some clothes here, respectable merchant's attire. With a hat and perhaps spectacles, you might pass for a visiting businessman. And Kiana? I have an idea for that too, Martha said, a glint in her eye that Ethan had learned to respect. But you'll both need rest first. Tomorrow will be challenge enough. She showed them to separate rooms, a luxury after days of hard travel and sleeping rough. Ethan's room was small but comfortable, with a real bed and clean sheets. He realized with a pang how long it had been since he had enjoyed such simple comforts. Sleep, however, proved elusive. His mind raced with planning, contingencies, worries. The stakes had never been higher, and the obstacles never more daunting. If they failed, it wouldn't just be his life at risk, but Kiana's, her people's, and possibly Martha's as well. A soft knock at his door roused him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Kiana standing there, a troubled expression on her face. I couldn't sleep, she explained. Too much to consider. Ethan nodded, understanding. Come in. She entered, taking a seat in the room's single chair, while Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. In the dim lamplight, her features seemed softer, the defensive hardness momentarily absent. What if we find nothing? She asked, giving voice to the fear that had been nagging at him as well. What if there is no evidence, or it's not enough? Then we warn your father anyway, Ethan replied. At least your people will have time to prepare, to move deeper into the mountains. Kiana shook her head. You don't understand. My father will not abandon our sacred land. He will fight, even against impossible odds. Then we make sure it's not impossible, Ethan said with more confidence than he felt. We find the evidence, we stop Hollister. She studied him, her dark eyes searching his face. You believe it can be done? I have to, he answered simply. A moment of understanding passed between them, a shared recognition of the burden they carried. Then Kiana rose, moving toward the door. Thank you, Ethan, she said softly, for believing when others would not. After she had gone, Ethan lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling beams. Despite the danger that lay ahead, despite the near impossible task they faced, he felt a strange sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for too long. Whatever came next, he would face it not just for redemption, but for something larger. For justice, for truth, and perhaps most surprisingly, for the woman who had brought him out of his self-imposed exile to face the world again. With that thought, he finally drifted into a dreamless sleep, the first in many years without the ghosts of Red River to haunt him. Morning brought Martha's promised disguises, and with them, a transformation neither Ethan nor Kiana had anticipated. Ethan barely recognized himself in the mirror, clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed and pomaded, wearing a businessman's suit with a high collar and cravat. Wire-rimmed spectacles completed the illusion of a respectable Easterner, far removed from the rough frontier scout he had been. But it was Kiana's disguise that truly astonished him. Martha had dressed her in a modest but fashionable dress of deep blue, her long hair arranged in a style befitting a well-bred lady, with a touch of powder to lighten her complexion slightly, and a small hat with a partial veil. She could easily pass for a woman of mixed Mexican-American heritage, a merchant's wife, perhaps, or a teacher. You clean up well, Mr. Harlow, Martha observed with a smile as she made final adjustments to his cravat. And you, my dear, she added to Kiana, look absolutely lovely. Kiana seemed uncomfortable in the unfamiliar clothing, but she carried herself with the same innate dignity she had shown in buckskins. Will this truly fool them? She asked doubtfully. People see what they expect to see, Martha assured her. No one will be looking for an Apache woman in a fine dress, nor a wanted man in a business suit. What's our story? Ethan asked, adjusting the uncomfortable spectacles. You're Edward Sinclair, a mining investor from Denver, visiting Cottonwood to assess business opportunities, Martha explained. Kiana is your wife, Elena. You're staying at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. She's a friend and will back your story if anyone asks. And our purpose in town? A meeting with Reverend Wakefield to discuss a possible donation to his church building fund. Martha's eyes twinkled. He never turns down an opportunity to charm potential benefactors. Clever, Ethan acknowledged. That gets us into his home. I've arranged for a buggy from Mrs. Abernathy, Martha continued. Less conspicuous than riding in. It will be waiting at the crossroads in an hour. As they prepared to leave, Martha drew Ethan aside. Be careful, she warned in a low voice. Hollister is desperate, and desperate men are unpredictable. If you're discovered, we'll be fine, Ethan assured her, though they both knew it was far from certain. Thank you, Martha, for everything. She pressed something into his hand, a small revolver easily concealed in a pocket. Just in case, she said. Now go, and God be with you both. The journey to Cottonwood took most of the morning, the buggy moving at a sedate pace along dusty roads. Ethan and Kiana maintained their roles even when alone, practicing the mannerisms and speech patterns of their assumed identities. By the time the town's buildings came into view, they had settled into their disguises with growing confidence. Cottonwood was larger than Ethan remembered. New buildings had sprung up along the main street, and the population seemed to have doubled since his last visit. The increased prosperity was evident in the freshly painted storefronts and the number of horses and wagons lining the thoroughfare. It was market day, and the town square bustled with activity. They passed a group of Frontier Justice League members standing outside the saloon, their armbands marking them as Wakefield zealots. Ethan kept his face impassive as the men glanced at the buggy, their eyes sliding over the respectable couple without interest. Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house stood on a quiet side street, a two-story structure with a wraparound porch and neat flower beds. The proprietress, a widow in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, greeted them warmly for the benefit of any observers, then showed them to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. Martha sent word yesterday, she explained once they were private. I've arranged your meeting with Wakefield for 3 o'clock. That gives you time to rest and prepare. Thank you, Ethan said sincerely. We appreciate the risk you're taking. Mrs. Abernathy's expression hardened. No risk too great to see justice done. My husband died at Fort Grant, following Hollister's orders in a foolish engagement that should never have happened. I've waited a long time to see that man answer for his crimes. After she had gone, Ethan and Kiana discussed their strategy in hushed voices. Wakefield will be suspicious by nature, Ethan cautioned. We need to appear genuinely interested in his church while looking for any documents or correspondence that might implicate Hollister. And if he has nothing, Kiana asked? Then we move to Plan 2, the Broken Wheel Saloon tonight. Hollister usually holds court there in the evenings. Ethan removed the uncomfortable spectacles, rubbing the bridge of his nose. One way or another, we need to find something before we leave town. At precisely 3 o'clock, they presented themselves at Reverend Wakefield's residence, a modest house attached to the white-steepled church that dominated the town square. A maid showed them into a study where Wakefield waited to receive them. Daniel Wakefield was a tall, lean man in his 50s, with thinning blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. He greeted them with practiced warmth, his handshake firm, his smile not quite reaching those unsettling eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair, what a pleasure, he said, gesturing to chairs arranged before his desk. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you were interested in our humble church. Indeed, Reverend, Ethan replied, adopting the slightly nasal tones of an educated Easterner. My wife and I are considering investments in this region, and we believe in supporting spiritual growth alongside economic development. Wakefield nodded approvingly. A commendable philosophy, Mr. Sinclair. Too often, material progress outpaces moral guidance, with disastrous results. Precisely our concern, Ethan agreed. We've heard much about your work here, bringing civilization and order to the frontier. The flattery had its intended effect. Wakefield warmed to his subject, expounding at length on his vision for Cottonwood and the surrounding territory. As he talked, Ethan surreptitiously scanned the study, noting the filing cabinet in one corner and the correspondence neatly arranged on the desk. Kiana remained silent but attentive, playing the role of supportive wife while her eyes cataloged every detail of the room. Of course, we face challenges, Wakefield was saying, his tone darkening. The Apache menace continues to threaten our community. Just last week, a family of settlers was found murdered not 10 miles from here. Ethan felt Kiana tense beside him, but maintained his own composure. Terrible, he murmured sympathetically. Is the Army not addressing the problem? Major Hollister does what he can with limited resources, Wakefield replied. But we formed our own protective association, the Frontier Justice League, to supplement official efforts. Commendable initiative, Ethan said, leaning forward with apparent interest. I'd be curious to learn more about this league. Perhaps there's a way we could support both your church and these security efforts. Wakefield's eyes lit up at the prospect of additional funding. I'd be delighted to discuss it. In fact, Major Hollister will be joining us for dinner this evening. Perhaps you and Mrs. Sinclair would care to join us. 6 o'clock, here at the parsonage. It was an opportunity beyond what they had hoped for, a chance to observe Hollister and Wakefield together, to potentially overhear their plans. But it was also dangerously risky. Would Hollister recognize Ethan, despite the disguise? We would be honored, Ethan replied before he could second-guess himself. Wouldn't we, my dear? Kiana nodded, her smile perfect, but her eyes conveying a clear message to Ethan. Are you insane? Excellent! Wakefield clapped his hands together. Now, would you care to see the children? We're planning an expansion to accommodate our growing congregation. The tour of the church provided no opportunities for investigation, but as they were leaving, Ethan deliberately left his pocket watch on Wakefield's desk. They had nearly reached Mrs. Abernathy's when he patted his pockets with manufactured alarm. My watch, I must have left it in the Reverend's study, he exclaimed. Elena, dear, you go on to the boarding house. I'll return for it quickly. Kiana's eyes narrowed slightly, but she played along. Don't be long, Edward. You know how I worry. Ethan hurried back to the parsonage, arriving just as Wakefield was leaving for a hospital visit. The maid remembered him and allowed him into the study to retrieve his forgotten item. Alone at last, Ethan moved swiftly. He first checked the desk, rifling through correspondence with practiced efficiency. Most were church matters, donation acknowledgments, committee reports. Then, in a bottom drawer, he found a locked metal box. Using skills acquired during his scouting days, he picked the simple lock and lifted the lid. Inside lay what he had been seeking. Letters from Hollister. Detailed maps of Apache territory with mining sites clearly marked. And most damning of all, a contract between Wakefield, Hollister, and the Western Mining Consortium, promising shares in exchange for securing access to specified lands. The dates aligned perfectly with the Red River Massacre. One letter explicitly mentioned removing obstacles and ensuring no witnesses remain. It was the evidence they needed, proof of conspiracy, of murder for profit, of the true motives behind the tragedy that had claimed so many lives, including Warren's. Ethan quickly copied the most incriminating passages into a small notebook he carried, along with dates and signatures. He dared not take the originals. Their disappearance would immediately raise alarms. Just as he was replacing the box, he heard footsteps approaching the study. Hastily locking the drawer, he positioned himself near the desk, pocket watch in hand, as Wakefield entered. Ah, Mr. Sinclair, the preacher said, surprise evident in his voice. Sadie mentioned you had returned for your watch. Yes, careless of me, Ethan replied with an embarrassed smile, holding up the timepiece. Found it right where I left it. I was just admiring your collection again. He gestured to a shelf of leather-bound books. Impressive theological library. Wakefield's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes had hardened with suspicion. Indeed, my life's passion, after justice for this community. Speaking of which, Ethan said, moving toward the door, I look forward to our dinner this evening. Meeting Major Hollister will be most illuminating. Yes, Wakefield agreed, his tone measured. I believe it will be. As Ethan walked back to the boarding house, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had aroused Wakefield's suspicions. The evening dinner would be even more dangerous than he had anticipated. But with the evidence he now possessed, they had options. They could leave town immediately, taking their findings to the territorial governor in Tucson. When he shared his discoveries and concerns with Kiana in the privacy of their room, she listened intently, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. "We should leave now," she urged when he had finished. "We have what we came for." "Not quite," Ethan countered. "The evidence is strong but circumstantial. If we could get Hollister or Wakefield to incriminate themselves directly, perhaps at this dinner, it would strengthen our case considerably." Kiana paced the small room, the unfamiliar dress rustling with her movements. "It's too dangerous. Hollister knows your face, your voice, and if Wakefield suspects anything, he already does," Ethan admitted. "But he won't act without confirmation. And Hollister has never seen you. He won't be looking for an Apache woman in fine clothes and powdered skin." She stopped pacing, fixing him with an intense stare. "You want to use me as bait?" "No," Ethan protested. "I want us to complete what we started. Together." They argued in hushed voices for nearly an hour, weighing risks against potential gains. In the end, they reached a compromise. They would attend the dinner, but at the first sign of recognition or danger, they would flee immediately to the rendezvous point where Talon waited outside town. If all went well, they would have additional evidence. If not, they still had enough to take their case to higher authorities. As Kiana adjusted her dress for the evening engagement, she paused, meeting Ethan's eyes in the mirror. "We're walking into the den of those who slaughtered my people," she said softly. "I never imagined I would do so willingly, in a dress, pretending to be the wife of a white man." "Life takes unexpected turns," Ethan replied. 2 weeks ago, I never imagined I'd be plotting against Hollister with the daughter of an Apache chief." A small smile touched her lips. "The spirits have a strange sense of humor." "That they do," Ethan agreed, offering his arm as they prepared to face what might be the most dangerous dinner party in the history of Cottonwood. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn as Ethan and Kiana approached Reverend Wakefield's residence. Lanterns illuminated the path to the door, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them like grasping fingers. Kiana's hand rested lightly on Ethan's arm, but he could feel the tension in her grip. "Remember," he whispered as they reached the porch, "speak as little as possible. Let me do the talking." She nodded almost imperceptibly as Wakefield himself opened the door, greeting them with the practiced smile of a man accustomed to hiding his true thoughts. "Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair, welcome." The Reverend ushered them inside, where the aroma of roast beef and baked apples filled the air. "Our other guest has just arrived." The parlor was warmly lit by oil lamps, its furnishings modest but respectable, befitting a man of the cloth with aspirations to something grander. And there, standing by the fireplace with a glass of amber liquid in his hand, was Major James Hollister. Time seemed to slow as Ethan met the eyes of the man who had ordered the massacre at Red River, who had effectively killed his brother. Hollister looked much as he remembered, tall, distinguished, with silver at his temples and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to command. Only the new insignia on his uniform jacket marked the passage of time. "Major Hollister, may I present Mr. Edward Sinclair and his wife, Elena," Wakefield said, making the introductions. "They're considering investments in our community, including support for our church building fund." Hollister stepped forward, extending his hand. "A pleasure, Mr. Sinclair. We always welcome enterprising men with vision." Ethan shook the offered hand, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to recoil. "The pleasure is mine, Major. Your reputation precedes you." "Does it now?" Something flickered in Hollister's eyes, a momentary calculation perhaps, or the beginnings of suspicion. "All good, I hope. Your efforts to bring civilization to this wilderness are much admired," Ethan replied smoothly, falling deeper into his role. "Few have the courage to do what must be done." The calculated flattery seemed to ease Hollister's wariness. He turned to Kiana, taking her gloved hand with a slight bow. "Mrs. Sinclair, you bring much-needed refinement to our rough frontier." Kiana murmured a demure, "Thank you," lowering her eyes as a proper lady might, though Ethan knew it was to hide the fury that must be raging within her. Wakefield's housekeeper announced dinner, and they moved to the dining room where a table had been laid with the best china and silver the parsonage could provide. Throughout the soup course, the conversation remained safely on neutral topics: the weather, the growth of cottonwood, the challenges of travel in the territory. It was during the main course that Wakefield deliberately steered the discussion toward more dangerous waters. I was explaining to Mr. Sinclair about our local difficulties with the Apache, he said, slicing his beef with precise movements. As a potential investor, he naturally has concerns about security. Hollister dabbed his mouth with a napkin before responding. A valid concern, but one that will soon be resolved permanently. Oh? Ethan affected an expression of interested relief. That's encouraging news. Let's just say that plans are in motion to ensure the Apache no longer threatens civilization's progress in this territory. Hollister replied, his tone suggesting he'd already said more than intended in mixed company. The good Lord helps those who help themselves, Wakefield added with a knowing smile. And we've been blessed with resources worth protecting. Resources? Ethan prompted, seizing the opening. I understood this was primarily ranch land. Hollister and Wakefield exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Mr. Sinclair, the major said carefully, you strike me as a man who recognizes opportunity. Perhaps after dinner, we might speak more, specifically about the future of this region. I'd welcome that, Ethan replied, his heart racing despite his outwardly calm demeanor. Beside him, Kiana remained silent, playing her role perfectly while absorbing every word, every nuance. Her composure was remarkable considering she was breaking bread with the architects of her family's destruction. As the meal progressed, Ethan noticed Hollister studying him with increasing intensity during lulls in the conversation. The disguise was good, but would it withstand such close scrutiny? He redoubled his efforts to maintain his Eastern accent and mannerisms, even as sweat began to gather at his collar. After dessert, an apple pie that Ethan could barely taste through his growing anxiety, Wakefield suggested the men retire to his study for brandy and substantive discussion, while his housekeeper entertained Mrs. Sinclair in the parlor. Actually, Kiana spoke up with perfect timing, if you gentlemen wouldn't mind, I find myself rather fatigued from our journey. Perhaps Mr. Sinclair could escort me back to our lodgings before your discussion. Her intervention provided the perfect excuse to exit before Hollister's suspicions could crystallize. Ethan rose immediately, all solicitude. My dear, of course, gentlemen, if you'll excuse us, perhaps we might continue our conversation tomorrow. Wakefield seemed about to object, but Hollister waved a dismissive hand. Family obligations come first, of course. Tomorrow then, say 10 o'clock at my office. I have some maps and projections that might interest you. Perfect, Ethan agreed, already helping Kiana with her shawl. Thank you for a most illuminating evening. They maintained their charade until they were well away from the parsonage, walking at an unhurried pace suitable for a respectable couple. Only when they turned onto a darker side street did Kiana finally speak freely, her voice a tense whisper. He suspects. I could see it in his eyes when he looked at you. I know, Ethan acknowledged grimly, but he's not certain, or he wouldn't have suggested tomorrow's meeting. We won't be attending that meeting, Kiana stated flatly. We have enough evidence. We need to leave tonight. Ethan hesitated. There's one more place we should check. The Broken Wheel. Hollister keeps a private room there for meetings he doesn't want witnessed at the fort. No, Kiana gripped his arm. It's too dangerous. Hollister and Wakefield will go there after we've left, and they'll be discussing their suspicions. Exactly, Ethan said, which makes it our best chance to hear their unguarded conversation, to get the final proof we need. They argued in fierce whispers all the way back to Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. In their room, Kiana finally threw up her hands in frustration. You are as stubborn as a desert mule, she declared. Why risk everything when we already have what we came for? Because it might not be enough, Ethan insisted. Documents can be denied. Signatures claimed forgeries. But if we hear them discuss Red River directly, planning another massacre. And how do you propose to listen to this conversation? Walk into the saloon and sit at their table? Ethan shook his head. The private room at the Broken Wheel has a peculiarity I discovered years ago. There's a vent that connects to the storeroom next door, allows cigar smoke to escape, but also carries sound. If we can access that storeroom, Kiana studied him, her expression shifting from exasperation to reluctant consideration. You've thought this through. I have, Ethan confirmed. 1 hour, no more. If we hear nothing useful by then, we leave immediately for the rendezvous with Talon. After a long moment, she nodded. 1 hour, but we go as we are, not as the Sinclairs. If we must flee, these clothes will only hinder us. They changed quickly into the practical clothing they had worn on their journey, though Ethan kept his beard shaved to maintain some difference from his wanted poster image. Mrs. Abernathy provided them with a back exit from the boarding house, away from curious eyes. The Broken Wheel Saloon stood at the far end of Cottonwood's main street, its raucous noise and yellow lamplight spilling into the night. Ethan led Kiana down an alley that ran behind the establishments, counting doorways until he reached the saloon's rear entrance. "The storeroom is there," he whispered, indicating a small window at ground level. "Deliveries come through that door, but it will be locked at this hour." Kiana produced a thin knife from her boot. Not for long. Her skill with the makeshift lockpick was impressive. Within moments, the door swung open with barely a creak. They slipped inside, closing it carefully behind them. The storeroom was dark and cramped, filled with barrels of whiskey and crates of supplies. Ethan navigated through the narrow spaces by memory and touch, leading them to the far wall where the vent was located. "Here," he whispered, positioning himself beside a small metal grate near the ceiling. "We can hear but not be seen." They settled in to wait, the sounds of the main saloon muffled but audible through the walls. Piano music, laughter, the clink of glasses. Time stretched interminably, and Ethan began to fear they had missed their opportunity. Perhaps Hollister had chosen not to come tonight, or had selected a different venue. Then, just as he was about to suggest they abandon the plan, voices approached the private room next door. The door opened and closed, followed by the scrape of chairs. "Becoming careless, Daniel." Hollister's voice, unmistakable despite its lowered volume. "These Sinclairs. Something isn't right." "Nonsense," Wakefield replied, though he sounded less certain than his words suggested. "Just another Eastern couple, looking for investment opportunities." Perhaps, but there was something familiar about the man. Something in his eyes. A third voice joined the conversation, Blackburn's rough drawl. "Want me to have them watch it, Major?" "Already arranged," Hollister replied, "if they're who I suspect." "Harlow?" Wakefield asked, lowering his voice further. "Surely not. The man's beard is gone. His manner entirely different." Ethan and Kiana exchanged alarmed glances in the darkness. Their disguises had not been as effective as they'd hoped. "Regardless," Hollister continued, "we can't afford complications now, not with everything so close to fruition." "The men are ready?" Wakefield asked. 50 soldiers, plus your Justice League volunteers. More than enough for the task. "And the Apache will be where you predict?" Hollister's voice took on a note of smug satisfaction. "My scouts report they're exactly where we want them, concentrated in that hidden valley. They think they're so clever, but there are always traders willing to sell information for the right price." Ethan felt Kiana stiffen beside him, her breath catching. Someone had betrayed her people's sanctuary. "When do we move?" Blackburn asked, a cruel anticipation in his tone. 3 days from now. Dawn attack, just like at Red River." Hollister's voice hardened. "This time, we finish what we started. No survivors to tell tales, no witnesses to question our methods. Just open land, ready for progress." "The governor," Wakefield began, "will receive our report of a necessary military action against hostile forces," Hollister interrupted. "By the time anyone investigates, the mine will be established and producing. Money has a way of making moral objections disappear." "And if Harlow is indeed here in Cottonwood," Wakefield pressed, "then he joins the Apache in extinction," Hollister replied coldly. "Blackburn, double the patrols. If it's him, I want him found before dawn." The conversation shifted to logistics, weapons, approach routes, division of forces. Ethan and Kiana had heard enough. With a silent gesture, he indicated they should retreat. Moving carefully through the cluttered storeroom, they reached the door and slipped back into the alley, the night air cool against their faces after the stuffy confines. 3 days, Kiana whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "We must warn my father." "We will," Ethan assured her. "But first we need to get out of town. Hollister's men will be searching everywhere by now." They kept to the shadows, avoiding the main streets as they made their way toward the outskirts of Cottonwood. Their plan was to retrieve their horses from the livery stable using the back entrance, then ride for the rendezvous point where Talon waited. They had almost reached the livery when disaster struck. Turning a corner, they collided with a patrol, 2 Justice League members making their rounds. The men reacted with instant suspicion, reaching for their weapons. "Hold there," one commanded. "State your business." Ethan stepped forward, trying to shield Kiana with his body. "Just heading home after a late night, friends," he said, slurring his words slightly as if drunk. The ruse might have worked if not for the sudden flare of a match as the second man lit a cigarette. In the brief illumination, his eyes widened in recognition. "It's him! It's Harlow!" he shouted, drawing his pistol. Everything happened at once. Ethan lunged forward, tackling the first man before he could fire. Kiana moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, disarming the second with a kick that sent his gun clattering across the street. But the damage was done. The man's shout had alerted others nearby. "Run!" Ethan yelled, scrambling to his feet as more shouts echoed down the street. They fled into the maze of alleys behind the main buildings, pursuit close behind. Gunshots rang out, bullets splintering wood near their heads. Ethan pulled Kiana into a narrow passage between two structures, then through the back door of what appeared to be a carpenter's shop. "We can't reach the livery now," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. "They'll have it surrounded." "Then we go on foot," Kiana decided, her composure remarkable despite the danger. "Into the desert. Talon will find us." They slipped out through a window, dropping into another alley that led toward the edge of town. Behind them, alarm bells began to ring, and the shouts of men organizing search parties filled the night. Cottonwood was waking up, and soon every exit would be watched. They reached the last row of buildings, the open desert just visible beyond. A wooden fence separated them from freedom, easily scaled under normal circumstances. But as they approached, a mounted figure appeared, blocking their path. "Going somewhere, Harlow." Blackburn's voice was almost friendly, at odds with the revolver aimed steadily at Ethan's chest. "The Major will be pleased to see you. Both of you." Ethan's mind raced, calculating options, angles, chances. His own gun was accessible, but Blackburn would fire before he could draw. Kiana stood motionless beside him, but he could sense her coiled readiness. "No sudden moves now," Blackburn warned, seeming to read his thoughts. "I only need one of you alive to talk." The standoff stretched for a heartbeat, then two. Then, with no warning, an arrow hissed through the darkness, striking Blackburn's shoulder with enough force to knock him from his saddle. He fell hard, his gun discharging harmlessly into the ground. "Move!" Kiana grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the fence. Three Apache warriors materialized from the shadows. Talon and his companions, their faces painted for battle. Talon spoke rapidly to Kiana as they vaulted the fence, indicating they should follow. "He's been watching the town," Kiana translated breathlessly as they ran into the desert night. "Saw the commotion and came to help." Behind them, Cottonwood erupted in chaos. More gunshots, shouts, the thunder of hooves as mounted men gave pursuit. But the Apache led them along invisible paths, through terrain where horses couldn't easily follow. After an hour of hard running, they paused in the shelter of a rock formation, listening to the sounds of pursuit growing more distant. "They're heading in the wrong direction," Talon said with grim satisfaction, speaking in accented English for Ethan's benefit. "But they will circle back by dawn." "We need to reach the valley," Kiana insisted. "Warn our people. Hollister plans to attack in 3 days." Talon's expression darkened. "How do they know of the valley?" "It is sacred, secret." "Someone betrayed its location," Ethan explained. "A traitor, according to Hollister." Talon spat a curse. "Gray Fox. He came 2 moons ago, bringing metal pots, taking away furs. Too friendly, asked too many questions." "It doesn't matter now," Kiana interjected. "What matters is warning our father, preparing defenses." Talon nodded, then turned to Ethan with narrowed eyes. "You have proof of Hollister's crimes?" "Yes," Ethan confirmed, patting his vest pocket where he kept the notebook with his copied evidence. "Enough to convince the territorial governor, if we can reach him." "Split up," Talon decided after a moment's consideration. "You," he pointed to Ethan, "take the evidence to your authorities. Kiana and I will warn our people." It was the logical solution, but Ethan felt an unexpected reluctance at the thought of separating from Kiana. Their journey together had forged a bond he hadn't anticipated, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose that had somehow grown into something more complex. Kiana seemed to share his hesitation. "The valley is closer," she argued. "We should both go there first." then decide our next move. No time, Talon insisted. Hollister will send men in all directions at first light. We must be far from here by then, on separate paths to confuse them. He was right, and they all knew it. Ethan nodded reluctantly. I'll head south toward Tucson. The governor has an office there. If I ride hard, I can make it in 2 days. We'll send warriors to meet you on the road, Talon said, surprising Ethan with this offer of assistance, to ensure you reach your destination. One of the other Apache warriors brought forward a horse, Ethan's own mount from the livery stable. How? He began. We watched the town for days, Talon explained with a hint of pride. Knew where they kept the horses. Took this one when the shooting started, knowing you would need it. The practicality and foresight impressed Ethan. He had underestimated Talon's tactical thinking. As they prepared to part ways, Kiana moved to Ethan's side. In the starlight, her face was composed, but her eyes held an intensity that caught his breath. Be careful, she said softly. Hollister will have men watching all roads. I'll reach the governor, he promised. What we heard tonight won't happen. Not again. She hesitated, then reached up to touch his face briefly. When this is over, there are things we should discuss. The simple gesture and unfinished thought contained worlds of meaning. Ethan covered her hand with his own for a moment. Yes, when this is over. Talon called to her impatiently in Apache, and the moment broke. With a final nod to Ethan, Kiana turned away, disappearing into the darkness with her kinsman. Ethan watched until he could no longer distinguish their forms from the desert shadows, then mounted his horse and turned south, toward Tucson in the hope of justice. Behind him, the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, revealing a landscape both harsh and beautiful in its stark simplicity. Somewhere in that vastness, Kiana was racing to save her people, while he carried the evidence that might prevent another massacre. Their paths diverged now, but something told him they would cross again. Whether in victory or tragedy remained to be seen. What Ethan didn't realize was that Hollister had anticipated their moves with the cunning of a seasoned tactician. Before leaving for Tucson himself, the Major had dispatched riders to all major settlements and routes in the territory with clear orders. Watch for Ethan Harlow and the Apache woman, especially on roads leading to any government officials. Hollister knew that evidence against him would only be valuable in the hands of someone with authority, the territorial governor being the obvious choice. If Harlow surfaces, he'll head for Tucson, Hollister had told Blackburn the night before. The man was always predictable, righteous to a fault, set men on all approaches to the governor's office. This foresight explained why Blackburn's scout had been positioned on that particular ridge, watching the southern approach to Tucson with a patience born of certainty. Hollister had read his opponent's strategy like an open book, a skill that had served him well until now. What he hadn't accounted for was Ethan's Apache guides and their intimate knowledge of hidden paths through the desert. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Ethan pushed his horse along the southern trail. He had been riding for hours, stopping only when necessary to rest the animal and drink sparingly from his canteen. The road to Tucson stretched before him, a ribbon of dust cutting through the parched landscape. His mind churned with all they had discovered. Hollister's plans, Wakefield's complicity, the imminent danger to Kiana's people. The evidence in his pocket felt like a burning coal, vital yet dangerous to carry. If he could reach the governor in time, present the documentation, perhaps the attack could be stopped through official channels. If not, he refused to consider failure. Too many lives depended on his success. Near midday, he spotted a dust cloud on the horizon behind him, riders moving fast. Hollister's men, almost certainly. Ethan veered off the main trail, urging his horse up a rocky slope toward higher ground where he could assess the situation. From his vantage point among the boulders, he counted 5 horsemen following his trail with the determination of experienced trackers. They would catch him eventually if he remained on open ground. His horse was tiring, and theirs seemed fresh. Scanning the terrain ahead, Ethan spotted a narrow canyon cutting through the hills about 2 miles distant. If he could reach it before his pursuers closed the gap, he might lose them in the maze-like passages. It was a gamble, but his options were dwindling with each passing minute. He descended the slope on the far side out of sight of the search party, then pushed his mount to a gallop toward the canyon entrance. The horse responded valiantly, seeming to sense the urgency of their situation. They reached the canyon with the sounds of pursuit still distant, a small advantage, but one Ethan intended to maximize. The canyon walls rose steeply on either side, creating deep shadows despite the midday sun. Ethan slowed his pace, mindful of the treacherous footing, as the passage narrowed and twisted. He knew that speed must now give way to strategy. One wrong turn in this labyrinth could leave him trapped. A sudden movement ahead caught his attention, a figure stepping out from behind a boulder, bow drawn and aimed at his chest. Ethan reined in sharply, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Then he recognized the warrior's face paint, one of Talon's men, sent to help as promised. The Apache lowered his bow and gestured urgently for Ethan to follow. Without hesitation, Ethan dismounted, leading his horse deeper into the canyon network. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, hoofbeats and men's voices echoing off the stone walls. The warrior led him through a series of turns that seemed random, but clearly followed some logic known to the Apache. They emerged into a small box canyon with a spring bubbling from the rock face, a hidden oasis in the desert's heart. Two more warriors waited there holding fresh horses. "Trade," the first warrior said simply, pointing to Ethan's exhausted mount. "Faster." Ethan transferred his minimal gear to the offered horse, a sturdy pinto that looked well-rested and trail-hardened. The efficiency of the Apache plan impressed him once again. They had anticipated his needs and positioned themselves accordingly, despite the haste of their own mission to warn the valley. "Hollister's men?" he asked, gesturing back toward the canyon entrance. The warrior nodded. "Yeah, we delay." His smile was cold, predatory. "You go." He pointed to a nearly invisible path climbing the canyon's far wall. "That way, Tucson. Half day of horse strong." Half a day, far better time than Ethan had dared hope. With fresh horses and Apache guidance, he might reach the governor by nightfall. "Thank you," Ethan said with genuine gratitude. "Tell Kiana." He paused, unsure what message would adequately convey his feelings. "Tell her I won't fail." The warrior studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Go, we make noise here." Ethan mounted the pinto and started up the hidden trail. Behind him, he heard the Apache warriors moving back toward the canyon entrance, deliberately making sounds to draw Hollister's men into a carefully planned ambush. He felt a moment of pity for the pursuers. They had no idea what awaited them. The path wound upward, eventually cresting the canyon wall and emerging onto a high plateau that offered a commanding view of the surrounding territory. Far below, Ethan could see the main trail he had abandoned, now empty of travelers in the afternoon heat. To the south, the distant smudge on the horizon that was Tucson beckoned. He set off at a pace the horse could maintain, grateful for the animal's sure-footed confidence on the rough terrain. The pinto seemed to know the way, following game trails and dry washes that kept them concealed from any observers on the main road below. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Ethan allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. If his progress continued unimpeded, he would reach Tucson by early evening. The territorial governor, James Fremont, was known to work late hours. With luck, Ethan could secure an immediate audience and present his evidence. But luck, it seemed, had other plans. The attack came without warning, a shot that kicked up dust inches from the pinto's hooves, causing the horse to rear in alarm. Ethan fought for control, canning the surroundings for the shooter. A second shot came closer, grazing his sleeve. There, on a ridge to his right, a lone figure with a rifle. Not one of Hollister's regular men, judging by the civilian clothing, but clearly determined to stop Ethan's progress. A bounty hunter, perhaps, or one of Wakefield's zealots sent on a parallel route to intercept him. Ethan had no choice but to abandon the high ground, guiding the pinto down a steep slope toward more covered terrain. The shooter fired again, the bullet whining past Ethan's ear with terrifying precision. Whoever this marksman was, he was no amateur. At the bottom of the slope, Ethan found himself in a dense mesquite thicket that offered concealment but slowed his progress considerably. He dismounted, leading the horse by its reins while drawing his own revolver. If the shooter followed, Ethan would at least have the advantage of the underbrush for cover. For nearly an hour, he moved cautiously through the thicket, listening for any sound of pursuit. The sun was setting now, painting the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. Tucson was close, perhaps 5 miles away, but night was falling and the governor's office would soon close. When Ethan finally emerged from the mesquite onto clearer ground, he allowed himself a moment of relief. The shooter seemed to have given up the chase, at least temporarily. Remounting, he urged the Pinto forward, determined to cover the remaining distance before full darkness descended. The lights of Tucson appeared in the distance, a constellation of yellow pinpoints against the deepening blue of evening. Ethan approached cautiously, aware that word of his fugitive status might have preceded him. The governor's office was in the Territorial Administration Building on the main plaza, a prominent location that would be difficult to approach unobserved. He needed a disguise, or at least a way to blend in until he could reach Fremont. Tucson was larger and more diverse than Cottonwood. A Mexican vaquero would attract little attention in the evening crowds. On the outskirts of town, Ethan spotted what he needed, a small farmhouse with laundry still hanging on a line outside. He approached cautiously, relieved to find no one in the yard. With a silent apology to the unknown owner, he appropriated a broad-brimmed sombrero and a colorful serape from the line, leaving several coins tucked into the clothespin as payment. Draped in the serape with the sombrero pulled low, Ethan rode into Tucson as darkness fell. The town was busy with evening activities. Saloons doing brisk business, families strolling the plaza, merchants closing their shops for the day. He kept his head down, guiding the Pinto through side streets toward the administration building. The territorial offices were still lit, but a guard stood at the main entrance. Ethan circled the building, looking for another way in. A side door stood partially open, light spilling out onto the darkened street. Voices drifted through the opening, a heated discussion in progress. "Cannot act without evidence, Major Hollister," an authoritative voice, presumably Governor Fremont. "With respect, Governor, we have reliable intelligence of an imminent Apache uprising." Hollister's unmistakable tone, smooth and persuasive. "The Nile Band has been gathering warriors, stockpiling weapons. We must strike preemptively." Ethan's blood ran cold. Hollister was here, in Tucson, speaking to the very man Ethan needed to convince. And he was laying groundwork for the attack, characterizing it as a defensive action against a threat that didn't exist. "Your last preemptive action resulted in significant civilian casualties, Major," Fremont replied, skepticism evident in his voice. "The Territorial Administration cannot afford another Red River incident." "Red River was an unfortunate necessity," Hollister countered smoothly. "But I assure you this operation will be conducted with the utmost precision. We have exact intelligence on the location of Neol's main camp." "From what source?" "A trader who regularly does business with them. Completely reliable." There was a pause, then Fremont spoke again, his tone reluctant. "I need more than your assurances, Major. Bring me concrete evidence of hostile intent, and I'll consider authorizing military action. Until then, maintain your patrols, but engage only if directly threatened." Ethan could almost picture Hollister's controlled frustration. The major was not accustomed to having his authority questioned. "Very well, Governor. I'll compile the documentation you require." Hollister's voice hardened slightly. "But should an attack occur in the meantime, the responsibility will rest with your office." "I'm prepared to accept that responsibility. Major, good evening." Footsteps approached the door, and Ethan quickly withdrew into the shadows of a nearby alley. Hollister emerged, his face set in lines of controlled anger. As he mounted his horse, another figure emerged from the shadows of the building. Reverend Wakefield, who had apparently been waiting outside during the meeting. "I take it the governor was not persuaded," Wakefield said quietly, as he fell into step beside Hollister's horse. "The fool wants evidence," Hollister spat, "after everything we've invested in this venture." Wakefield's face tightened with frustration. "My congregation has poured their savings into the mining consortium shares. The Eastern investors grow impatient. If we don't secure those claims soon—" "I'm well aware of the financial pressures, Daniel," Hollister cut him off. "Remember, my own future depends on this as much as yours. The general star I've been promised won't materialize without the support of certain senators who have invested heavily in this operation." "And my bishopric," Wakefield added with naked ambition. "The church elders have made it clear. Demonstrate financial success and growth in the territory, and the position is mine." His voice took on a harder edge. "We've come too far to be stopped now, James. My father didn't raise me to accept failure." "Nor did mine," Hollister agreed, the shared background momentarily softening his tone. "Cousins by blood, brothers in purpose, as always. They moved toward the hitching post where Wakefield's horse waited. The Apache must be removed, with or without Fremont's blessing, Wakefield said, his clerical collar a stark contrast to the ruthlessness in his voice. God's will demands we bring civilization to these lands, and if that requires fire and sword, so be it. 2 days, Hollister decided as Wakefield mounted. We move in 2 days, authorization or not. Make sure your Justice League volunteers are ready. They will be, Wakefield promised, righteous men eager to do the Lord's work. They rode off together toward the north side of town, two men bound by blood, greed, and a shared vision of progress built on others' suffering. Ethan waited until they were out of sight, then approached the side door. It was now or never. Fremont was alone, and this might be his only chance to present his evidence before Hollister returned with the fabricated proof of Apache hostilities. Taking a deep breath, Ethan removed the sombrero, straightened his clothing, and stepped through the door. The Territorial Administration building was quiet at this late hour, most offices dark and deserted. A single lamp burned in the corridor, illuminating the polished wood of the governor's office door. Ethan approached cautiously, aware that his appearance, trail-worn and dusty, would not inspire immediate confidence. Before he could knock, the door opened, and Governor James Fremont nearly collided with him. The governor stepped back in surprise, his hand moving instinctively toward a desk drawer where Ethan suspected a weapon was kept. "Who are you, sir? How did you get in here?" Fremont demanded, his voice steady despite the unexpected encounter. Ethan raised his hands slightly, showing they were empty. "Governor Fremont, my name is Ethan Harlow. I have urgent information regarding Major Hollister and his plans for the Apache territory." Recognition flashed in Fremont's eyes. "Harlow? The deserter Hollister's been hunting?" "I never deserted, sir. I left the service honorably after the Red River incident." Ethan kept his voice level, aware that everything depended on convincing this man of his credibility. "What I witnessed there, what Hollister ordered, it wasn't right." Fremont studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward a chair. "You have 5 minutes, Mr. Harlow. Make them count." Ethan wasted no time, producing his notebook with the copied evidence. "Hollister and Reverend Wakefield of Cottonwood are conspiring to drive the Apache from their lands. Not for security, but for gold. There's a rich vein near Red River that they've contracted to exploit with the Western Mining Consortium." He handed over the notebook, watching as Fremont's expression shifted from skepticism to concern as he read the detailed notes. "This is troubling," the governor admitted, "but copies of documents aren't conclusive proof. Hollister could claim you fabricated these notes." "The originals are in Wakefield's study in Cottonwood," Ethan explained. "But there's more. I overheard Hollister and Wakefield planning an attack on the Nile Band, not because of any uprising, but to eliminate witnesses and clear the land for mining operations. They intend to move in 3 days. Fremont's frown deepened. Hollister was just here requesting authorization for precisely such an action, claiming intelligence of hostile intent. "It's a lie," Ethan said firmly. "I've been to the Apache camp. They're peaceful, just trying to survive on what little land they have left. The only weapons they're stockpiling are for hunting and self-defense." "You've been to their camp?" Fremont's eyebrows rose. "How did you manage that?" Ethan hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "I have connections, people who trust me to speak the truth about what happened at Red River." The governor set the notebook down, leaning back in his chair with a troubled expression. "Red River has been a shadow over this territory for 2 years, Mr. Harlow. The official report cited Apache aggression, but there were always rumors." "It was a massacre, sir," Ethan said quietly. "Hollister ordered us to burn the village, leave no witnesses. When my brother tried to save a child from a burning hut, Hollister—" He paused, the memory still raw. "Warren overheard Hollister discussing the gold vein with someone the night before. I believe he was killed to silence him." Fremont was silent for a long moment, digesting this information. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Harlow. Without the original documents or corroborating witnesses, it's your word against a decorated officer's." "There is one more piece of evidence," Ethan said, reaching carefully into his jacket. He withdrew a small leather pouch and emptied its contents onto Fremont's desk. Several small nuggets of gold, gleaming in the lamplight. These were found in the stream bed at Red River, exactly where the village stood. Hollister has known about this deposit for years, waiting for the right moment to claim it. The governor picked up one of the nuggets, examining it closely. This doesn't prove a conspiracy. No, but it establishes motive, Ethan countered. And if you send men to search Wakefield's study in Cottonwood, you'll find all the proof you need. Fremont set the gold down, his expression troubled but thoughtful. Assuming what you say is true, what would you have me do, Mr. Harlow? I cannot simply order Hollister's arrest on this evidence alone. Send a telegram to Fort Grant, Ethan suggested. Order Hollister to stand down any operations against the Apache until a full investigation can be conducted. That will buy time to gather more evidence, protect innocent lives. And if Hollister ignores such an order, if he proceeds with his attack regardless, the question hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Hollister had the men, weapons, and local support to act independently if he chose. A telegram might slow him, but wouldn't stop a determined man with blood on his mind. Then I'll need to warn the Apache directly, Ethan said, the path forward suddenly clear to him. Give them time to evacuate the valley. Find safer ground. Fremont studied him intently. You care about these people. Why? Because they are human beings deserving of justice, Ethan replied simply. And because I've seen what happens when men like Hollister are allowed to act without consequence. A long silence followed, during which Fremont seemed to be weighing not just Ethan's words, but the man himself. Finally, the governor nodded, coming to a decision. I'll send the telegram tonight, ordering Hollister to postpone any military action pending my personal review, he said, rising from his chair. I'll also dispatch investigators to Cottonwood first thing tomorrow. But understand this, Mr. Harlow. If your accusations prove false, you'll face serious charges yourself. They aren't false, Ethan assured him, and I'm willing to stand trial for my part in Red River when this is over. But first, innocent lives must be protected. Fremont nodded, his expression grave. Go warn your Apache friends. I'll do what I can from here. As Ethan turned to leave, the governor added, Be careful, Harlow. Hollister won't give up his plans easily. Men like that, when cornered, become even more dangerous. I know, Ethan acknowledged. Thank you for listening, sir. Outside the administration building, Ethan retrieved his horse from where he'd left it in a side alley. Night had fully descended on Tucson, the streets quieter now as businesses closed and citizens retired to their homes. He had accomplished his primary mission, alerting the authorities to Hollister's true intentions. But he knew Fremont was right about the danger. A telegram might delay Hollister temporarily, but a man willing to order one massacre would not hesitate to defy orders and commit another. He needed to return to the Apache Valley immediately to ensure they were prepared regardless of what happened with the official investigation. The journey would be dangerous. Hollister's men would be watching all approaches, but there was no alternative. Kiana and her people needed to know that help might come too late. As Ethan rode north out of Tucson, the stars emerged in full brilliance above the desert, the same stars he had contemplated with Kiana what felt like a lifetime ago. Somewhere ahead, she was preparing her people for what might come. He hoped they would have time enough to escape the approaching storm. The Pinto moved steadily through the night, its stamina remarkable after the day's exertions. Ethan kept to the shadows where possible, avoiding the main trail in favor of less traveled paths through the desert. If Hollister had men watching the roads, which seemed likely, his best chance was to approach the Apache territory from an unexpected direction. He rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and himself. As dawn lightened the eastern horizon, Ethan found himself in familiar territory, the same broken landscape where he had separated from Kiana and Talon just a day earlier. From here, he knew the way to the Hidden Valley entrance, though approaching without an Apache guide would be challenging. The sun had fully risen when Ethan detected movement on a distant ridge. Riders moving with purpose toward the north. Through his field glass, he counted at least 20 men, heavily armed, with Hollister at their head. Despite the governor's telegram, the attack was proceeding. Ethan spurred his horse forward, taking a parallel route that might allow him to reach the valley before Hollister's force. It would be close. The major had a head start and more direct path. Everything now depended on speed and knowledge of the terrain. As he rode, a plan formed in Ethan's mind. If he could reach the narrow canyon that served as the main entrance to the valley before Hollister, he might be able to delay the attack long enough for the Apache to evacuate the most vulnerable members of their community. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it might save lives. The Pinto seemed to sense the urgency, maintaining a steady gallop despite the rough terrain. Ethan pushed the animal to its limits, grateful for its endurance and sure-footedness. They crested a ridge overlooking the approach to the hidden valley, and Ethan's heart sank at what he saw. Hollister's men had already reached the canyon entrance. They had dismounted and were preparing to move in on foot, a smart tactical decision for the narrow confines ahead. But something was wrong with the picture. The men seemed hesitant, clustering at the entrance rather than advancing into the canyon as expected. Using his field glass again, Ethan saw the reason. The canyon was blocked by a crude but effective barricade of fallen boulders and trees. Behind it stood Apache warriors, bows drawn and rifles ready. Talon had prepared a defense. Ethan urged his horse down the slope, approaching Hollister's position from behind. He needed to see more clearly what was happening, to understand the tactical situation before deciding how to intervene. Finding cover behind a large boulder, he observed the standoff unfolding below. Hollister was clearly furious, gesturing angrily as he berated his men. Through the clear morning air, fragments of his tirade reached Ethan's position. "Cowards! They're savages with bows against our rifles. Push forward." But his men seemed reluctant, eyeing the narrow canyon with its multiple defensive positions. One soldier, an officer judging by his insignia, stepped forward to address Hollister. "Sir, with respect, it's a death trap. They have the high ground and cover. We'd lose half our men before reaching the valley." "Then we'll lose half," Hollister snapped. "The rest will finish the job. This ends today, Lieutenant, one way or another." The exchange confirmed Ethan's worst fears. Hollister was prepared to sacrifice his own men to achieve his goal. Rational arguments would not sway him, and the telegram from Governor Fremont had clearly been ignored or never received. As Ethan considered his options, a movement to his left caught his attention. Emerging from the rocks like a shadow-given form, Kiana approached his position, moving with the silent grace he had come to admire. She crouched beside him, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "You came back," she whispered. "I said I would," he replied simply. "The governor has been informed. He's sending investigators to Cottonwood, but Hollister moved faster than expected," she finished for him, nodding toward the standoff below. "Talon saw them coming. We've been preparing through the night." "The valley?" "Women, children, and elders are being evacuated through the hidden western pass," she explained. "But it takes time. We need to hold them here for at least another hour." Ethan studied the tactical situation with a professional eye. The barricade was well positioned, and the Apache defenders had excellent cover. But Hollister had numbers and firepower. If he ordered a determined charge, some would get through, and once inside the canyon, the advantage would shift. "I need to stop Hollister," Ethan decided. "Not just delay him, but end this for good." Kiana looked at him sharply, then narrowed her eyes in calculation. "You plan to confront him directly?" "By speaking the truth in front of his men." Ethan nodded. "Many of those soldiers don't know what this is really about. If they learn they're being used to secure a gold mine, not protect settlers—" "He'll kill you before you can finish," Kiana stated. She was silent for a moment, then added, "But not if he's distracted on two fronts." Ethan studied her face. "What are you thinking?" "My people know these canyons better than anyone," she said, her eyes gleaming with fierce intelligence. "While you approach from the front, I can position archers on the high ridges, not to attack but to be seen. The soldiers will be divided in their attention." "And nervous men make poor shots," Ethan finished, seeing the wisdom in her strategy. "But it's dangerous for your warriors to expose themselves like that." "No more dangerous than what you propose to do," she countered. "We'll each play to our strengths. You, with words, us, with the land itself." Their eyes met in perfect understanding. "Two approaches, one purpose." "I'll need a few minutes to position our warriors," she said, already rising to move. Ethan caught her arm gently. "Kiana." "I know," she said, her hand briefly covering his. "There are things between us that need speaking, but first we finish this." Her eyes held a promise. together. She disappeared into the rocks with the silent grace of one born to this landscape. Ethan watched her go, then turned his attention to preparing for his role in their shared plan. The Major was organizing his men into attack formation, apparently having overcome their initial reluctance through threats or promises. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped out from behind his cover and began walking openly down the slope toward Hollister's position, his hands held away from his weapons in a gesture of non-aggression. The risk was enormous, but the potential to prevent a massacre outweighed his personal safety. "Hollister!" he called when he was close enough to be heard clearly. "This ends now." The Major spun around, his hand dropping to his sidearm as he recognized Ethan's voice. The soldiers nearby turned as well, rifles raising instinctively toward this unexpected threat. "Harlow," Hollister's voice carried a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. "Saving me the trouble of hunting you down. How considerate." With a quick gesture from Hollister, two soldiers flanked Ethan, roughly seizing his arms, while a third removed his weapons. Ethan didn't resist. That wasn't part of his plan. "Bring him here," Hollister ordered, his voice hardening. "Let's show our men what happens to traitors who side with savages." The soldiers dragged Ethan forward, forcing him to his knees before Hollister. The Major drew his pistol, pressing the coal barrel against Ethan's temple. "Any last words before I execute you for desertion and treason?" Hollister asked, loud enough for all his men to hear, establishing the pretense of military justice. Despite the gun at his head, Ethan remained calm. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Hollister, overconfident, revealing his true nature before witnesses. Ethan continued his approach, maintaining a steady pace despite the weapons aimed at him. "Your men deserve to know why they're here, Major, why they might die today. They're here to eliminate a threat to territorial security," Hollister replied smoothly. "A duty you've betrayed by consorting with the enemy." "There is no threat," Ethan countered, loud enough for all to hear, "except to your mining interests. Tell them about the gold, Hollister. Tell them how you orchestrated Red River to secure a claim that will make you rich while they risk their lives." Hollister's finger tensed on the trigger. "You've always been a sentimental fool, Harlow. Progress requires sacrifice. The Apache are relics of a dying age. Is that what you told yourself at Red River?" Ethan pressed, his voice gaining strength despite the gun at his temple. "Was it progress when you ordered the burning of huts with children inside? When you shot women carrying water? When my brother Warren died trying to save an 8-year-old boy?" A murmur ran through the assembled soldiers. Many had heard rumors about Red River, but never from someone who was there. "Your brother was weak, just like you," Hollister snarled, his composure cracking. "This territory has no place for weak men." "Then why did you falsify your report?" Ethan challenged. "Why claim the Apache attacked first when there wasn't a warrior in that village? Was it because Washington might question orders to massacre civilians for a gold claim?" Hollister struck Ethan across the face with the pistol, drawing blood. "Enough! You think these men care about a few dead Indians? They understand what's at stake. Civilization itself." Lieutenant Chen stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, what is he talking about? What gold claim?" "Governor Fremont has the evidence," Ethan said, blood trickling from his split lip. "Hollister's partnership with Wakefield, their contract with Western Mining Consortium, the real reason for Red River. Investigators are already in Cottonwood." This news visibly shook Hollister. His eyes darted between Ethan and his increasingly uncertain men. "Lies, all lies. The governor authorized this action himself." "Did he?" Ethan looked around at the soldiers, many of whom now seemed uncertain. "Then why not wait for the official authorization to arrive? Why the rush, if not to finish your dirty business before the truth comes to light?" The lieutenant who had spoken earlier stepped forward. "Sir, is there an official authorization for this action?" Hollister's hand tightened on his pistol. "We don't need paper to do what's necessary, Lieutenant Chen. Now form the men for assault." "I suggest you reconsider that order, Major Hollister." A new voice entered the confrontation. Firm, authoritative, unexpected. All heads turned to see a group of riders approaching from the south. A military detachment led by a stern-faced colonel whose insignia identified him as Hollister's superior officer. Behind him rode Governor Fremont himself, accompanied by several territorial marshals. "Colonel Davis," Hollister acknowledged, his voice tight with suppressed rage. This is an unexpected pleasure. Stand down your men, Major, Davis ordered, dismounting with the fluid grace of a career cavalry officer. By order of Governor Fremont, all military actions against the Apache are suspended pending investigation. With respect, sir, we have intelligence of imminent threat. Save it, Hollister, Fremont interrupted, approaching with a document in hand. This telegram from Washington arrived this morning. President Grant himself has ordered a full inquiry into the Red River incident and your subsequent activities in Apache territory. The soldiers began lowering their weapons, relief evident on many faces. They had been prepared to fight if ordered, but few relished the prospect of charging into the well-defended canyon. Hollister's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. On the word of a deserter in a band of savages, you would compromise territorial security? On the evidence found in Reverend Wakefield's study this morning, Fremont corrected him. The Reverend is already in custody, singing quite a revealing song about your mutual business interests. Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he realized what had happened. Fremont had moved faster than promised, sending men to Cottonwood immediately after their conversation. The original documents had been found, and Wakefield had apparently chosen self-preservation over loyalty to Hollister. Major James Hollister, Colonel Davis said formally, you are relieved of command, effective immediately. You will surrender your sidearm and accompany these marshals to Tucson to answer charges of conspiracy, corruption, and violations of military code. For a moment, it seemed Hollister might resist. His hand remained on his pistol, his eyes darting between Davis, Fremont, and Ethan with cold calculation. Then, with deliberate slowness, he unbuckled his gun belt and held it out. As the marshals moved to restrain him, Hollister suddenly lunged forward, his face inches from Ethan's. Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Harlow, he hissed, his voice low enough that only Ethan and Kiana could hear. Men like me have friends in high places. The wheels of justice turn slowly, and sometimes not at all for those who cross us. Kiana stepped between them, her eyes flashing with controlled anger. And some justice comes from unexpected places, Major, she replied softly. Remember that in your prison cell. The marshals pulled Hollister back, securing his hands before leading him to a waiting horse. His final glance back carried a promise of vengeance that sent a chill through Ethan despite the desert heat. This chapter might be ending, but the story was far from over. Before Lieutenant Chen could respond, a tense voice called from the ridge above them. Lower your weapon, Major Hollister. All eyes turned to see Kiana standing on the rocky outcrop, bow drawn, arrow aimed directly at Hollister's heart. Behind her stood several Apache warriors, similarly armed. They had moved into position silently during the confrontation. One more move against him, she warned, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air, and you die where you stand. Hollister's laugh was bitter. Perfect timing. Here's your Apache threat, Lieutenant. Shall we defend ourselves? But the soldiers hesitated, caught between conflicting loyalties and mounting doubts. Many glanced between Ethan kneeling in the dust and Kiana on the ridge. A white man willing to die for the truth, an Apache woman determined to prevent another massacre. They aren't threatening anyone, Ethan said, meeting Kiana's eyes briefly before turning to the soldiers. They're defending their homes, just as you would. The question is, what are you defending by following Hollister's orders? Justice or a gold mine bought with innocent blood? The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, the desert silence broken only by the soft whistle of wind through the canyon rocks. Everything hung in perfect, dangerous balance, until the sound of approaching riders drew everyone's attention. A military detachment appeared from the south, led by Colonel Davis with Governor Fremont close behind. This isn't over, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on Ethan. Not by a long shot. Just as the marshals moved to take Hollister, a commotion rippled through the soldiers. Men were pointing toward the canyon walls where Kiana had appeared, standing tall on a prominent outcropping. Her voice carried clearly across the divide. Soldiers of the American Army, she called out in perfect English that surprised many of them. Look at what nearly happened today. You were ordered to kill my people, women, children, elders, not for your safety, but for gold. She gestured toward Hollister. Ask yourselves how many more would die for one man's greed. Several soldiers exchanged troubled glances. The lieutenant, Chen, stepped forward. Ma'am, are you Chief Niall's daughter? The one mentioned in the telegraph? I am, Kiana confirmed, and I stand ready to work with honorable men for peace, as does my father. She descended from her position with dignified grace, moving to stand beside Ethan. The time for blood is over. The time for truth has come. As Hollister was led away, his face dark with fury at this final defeat, Ethan turned to Kiana with newfound admiration. Where he had used evidence to convince authorities, she had spoken directly to the hearts of the men who would have been unwitting instruments of massacre. That, he said quietly, was something your father would be proud of. A small smile touched her lips. We each fight with the weapons we have. Yours is justice. Mine is truth. She glanced toward the barricade where Talon and the others waited. It seems both have won today. Ethan raised his hand in a signal of reassurance to the Apache defenders. It was over. Not completely, not perfectly, but the immediate danger had passed. There would be investigations, hearings, perhaps eventually justice for what happened at Red River. The path ahead remained complex and uncertain, but for now a massacre had been prevented. As the sun climbed higher in the desert sky, Ethan Harlow felt something he had not experienced in 2 years. The tentative beginnings of peace. The weight of 7 stones would always remain with him, but perhaps now he could begin to build something new beside that cairn of remembrance. And certainly, he thought as his eyes met Kiana's beside him, he would not build it alone. They had faced this challenge as equals, from different worlds but with a shared purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way. And perhaps, he thought as his eyes met Kiana's across the distance, he would not build it alone. 3 months later, Ethan stood on the ridge overlooking his rebuilt cabin, watching as the first winter rains darkened the thirsty desert soil. The past season had brought more changes than the weather alone, changes to the territory, to the Apache's situation, and to Ethan himself. The investigation into Red River had proceeded with surprising thoroughness, driven by Governor Fremont's determination to bring the truth to light. Hollister faced multiple charges, his military career in ruins. Wakefield had turned state's evidence, revealing details of the conspiracy in exchange for leniency. The Western Mining Consortium had withdrawn its claims to Apache lands, its directors distancing themselves from the scandal. More importantly, a new treaty had been negotiated with Neo and other Apache leaders, establishing boundaries that would be respected by both sides. It wasn't perfect, the pressures of settlement and development would continue, but it was a beginning, a foundation for coexistence rather than conflict. Ethan had testified before the Territorial Commission, recounting everything he had witnessed at Red River and in the months that followed. His own role in the massacre had been examined, but ultimately no charges were brought against him. Instead, he had been commended for his efforts to prevent further bloodshed. The cabin had been his first priority after returning from Tucson. With Martha's help and materials purchased with a portion of the reward offered for evidence against Hollister, he had rebuilt what Blackburn's men had burned. The new structure was sturdier than before, with more windows to let in light and a broader porch facing the western sunset. Behind the cabin, this cairn of 7 stones remained, a memorial he would never remove. But beside it now grew a small garden of native plants, seeds provided by Kiana from the hidden valley. Life alongside remembrance, growth from loss. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention. A rider appeared on the trail from the east, Kiana, her straight posture and fluid movement unmistakable even at a distance. She rode regularly between the Apache village and Ethan's cabin, serving as liaison between her people and the territorial authorities during the treaty negotiations. But today's visit was different. The negotiations had concluded yesterday, the treaty signed by all parties. This visit was personal, carrying the weight of decisions postponed during the crisis and its aftermath. Ethan walked down to meet her as she dismounted near the well. She wore a combination of traditional Apache garments and practical frontier clothing, a visual representation of the bridge she had become between two worlds. The rain follows you, he observed by way of greeting, nodding toward the darkening clouds. A good sign, she replied with a small smile. My father says rain on a new beginning brings prosperity. And is this a new beginning? Ethan asked, the question encompassing far more than the weather or the treaty. Kiana's expression grew serious. That depends on what you've decided. They had spoken of possibilities during the quiet moments between testimonies and negotiations, of Ethan's invitation to join the Territorial Ranger Service as a liaison with the Apache people, of Kiana's role as her father's representative to the white authorities, of the common ground they might find between these responsibilities, and of the personal feelings that had grown between them, complex and unexpected, crossing boundaries of culture and history that few had successfully navigated. "I've accepted the ranger position," Ethan said, "starting next month, based here, with responsibility for the Eastern Territories, including your people's lands." Kiana nodded, having expected this. "And your other decision?" Ethan gestured toward the cabin. "I've made changes, added a second room, expanded the porch, space enough for two lives intersecting, if that's still what you want." Her eyes held his, searching for certainty. "It won't be easy. There will be those on both sides who disapprove." "Nothing worthwhile is easy," Ethan replied simply. "But if we've learned anything from all this, it's that bridges must be built by those willing to stand with one foot in each world." A drop of rain landed on Kiana's cheek, then another. The promised storm was arriving, bringing life to the parched earth. She reached out, taking Ethan's hand in a gesture that symbolized the choice they were both making. "Then let us build," she said softly. As they walked toward the cabin, the desert around them seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. In a few weeks, if the rains continued, wildflowers would emerge from the seemingly lifeless soil, a brief, brilliant display of color and resilience in the harshest of environments. Like those flowers, what grew between Ethan Harlow and Kiana, daughter of Chief Warrior Neol, might be rare and challenging. But in its very unlikeliness lay its beauty and strength, a testament to the possibility that even in places scarred by fire, new life could take root and flourish. Behind them, rain began to fall in earnest upon the seven stones and the young plants growing alongside them, honoring the past while nurturing the future in the sacred fire of the desert.